Bastian. Chapter 21, The Wealthy Man's Effort and Sincerity. You don't resemble the same person who sold his daughter to me. Since I last saw you, you must have undergone an abrupt change of heart, Bastian said skeptically, tilting his head. Duke Diessen hastily retorted, that was only a mistake I made in a stressful circumstance, having second thoughts about his scathing remark. It wouldn't be prudent to embarrass the Captain Clauswitz by acting rashly, since he was well known for being reticent. Had I not shown mercy, the events of that fateful night at the gaming table would have taken a far different turn. Bastian spoke with confident ease about the subject. Meanwhile, Duke Diessen was filled with unease, discomfited by the direction of the conversation, which was far from what he had anticipated. Just then, the tea server appeared, interrupting their discussion. Regaining his breath, Duke Diessen took a moment to survey his surroundings. The tea server approached with the grace of a ghost, effortlessly pouring the steaming liquid into delicate cups. Their uniform, made of the finest material, spoke of their high rank among the serving staff. It was clear that they were part of a family of great power and prestige, far removed from the tarnished reputation of a mere antique merchant's household. The garden was a wild tangle of neglect, yet if one looked closely, the signs of one's meticulous care were still visible. Amid the overgrowth, ancient trees and rare blooms could still be found, a testament to the discerning taste of the former owner. It was whispered that the mansion was acquired by the antique dealer in a debt settlement from an aristocratic family who couldn't repay their loans. These parasites were like a filthy rat, spreading their contagion and eroding the world's order. The noble names that had built and protected the empire, its long history and traditions, were being ruined by these scoundrels, much like Duke Diessen himself. As they passed by the stately mansion, surrounded by verdant trees and adorned with a grand old fountain, Duke Diessen's eyes wandered back to Bastian sitting across from him. The imperial officer's uniform, adorned with medals of distinction earned in wartime, and the opulent townhouse located in the heart of the capital all spoke of his elevated status. Had Duke Diessen not known of Bastian's true origins, he would have easily believed him to be a scion of a prominent family, yet, like a rat playing at royalty among the ruins of a lost kingdom, Bastian's true nature was revealed. Why don't you use that sharp tongue of yours to tell the Emperor how you won Odette in a back-alley gambling den? If you lack the courage, I'll do it for you. Your newfound reputation will be buried in the mud by dawn. Duke Diessen spat out his animosity with biting words. He would have preferred a more sophisticated approach, but when the grandson of an antique dealer flaunted his arrogance, Duke Diessen was left with no choice. Suit yourself, Bastian said nonchalantly as he took a sip of tea, his voice echoing in the darkening purple evening. Is my reputation worth risking over such a trivial matter? It's no big deal if it gets tarnished. Huh? So the reputation of a hero is so easily sullied? At the end of the day, you can disguise yourself all you want, but your roots will always show. Despite his taunts, Duke Diessen's hands were soaked in cold sweat. In effort to conceal this, he redoubled his effort. So you presume to preach me about honor? Bastian sneered, flicking the remnants of his cigarette. His piercing blue eyes held the chill of a serpent's gaze, sending shivers down one's spine. You may have the Emperor's backing, but I am Odette's father, and I alone have the say in her fate. No matter what the Emperor desires, you will need my blessing to lay claim to her. Duke Diessen's voice rose in righteous anger, fueled by a fierce determination to protect his daughter by all means and ends. Duke Diessen had learned that Bastian was captivated with Odette. The whispers he gathered from his sources all confirmed the same tale, a scandal that had spread like wildfire through high society. What he saw and heard echoed this, a tale both intriguing and shocking. He knew all too well the power of love's sway, for he too had once been lost in its foggy haze. It was a vexing insult to say that Duke Diessen had attempted to take advantage of Princess Helene. If not for that, he would have abandoned his wife when she lost her status as an imperial princess. The fact that they had their precious diamond of a daughter, Odette, prevented that naive love from being totally worthless, even though they may have been better off in hindsight. I have the right to wed Odette to another person if I so choose. Odette will be far more suited to a more sophisticated and exquisite family, even if they are a little less wealthy, than you. You are nothing but a vulgar brat, even if you are a hero who is acclaimed, said Duke Diessen. Bastian tilted his head and grinned sarcastically, when he heard Duke Diessen's bluff. Then, why wait until now to wed your deserving daughter? Bastian queried. I was merely being cautious. Had our family's circumstances not taken a turn, Odette would have been wed to the Empire's most renowned family, perhaps even a foreign royalty, destined to become a queen. Oh, I see, Bastian nodded. So, to be worthy of my daughter's company, wouldn't it require a display of effort and genuine commitment? The Duke proposed. Effort and genuine commitment, Bastian repeated with a smirk. You really mean money, don't you? And with that, Bastian exposed the Duke's true intentions. So, I'm getting to the point. I won't be giving you anything. Bastian interjected with a confident and dismissive tone. If you wish to marry your daughter off to someone else, as you mentioned, it's your right as a father. I'll honor your decision. However, currently, the Emperor has his sights set on Lady Odette, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. He gave a casual shrug, his response taking the Duke by surprise. Whether you want to see her become the hostess of a prestigious family or a foreign queen, it's up to you, but if you want to keep that dream alive, you better consider all your options carefully. What? Wouldn't it be a shame for your daughter's reputation to be tarnished by rumors of her association with a lowlife like me? Bastian scoffed, the smirk on his face growing wider with each passing moment. But for me, it's just another tale in the making. He leaned in, his words dripping with venom. Duke Diessen's eyes widened in disbelief as Bastian continued his relentless attack. If you play your cards right, I'll return your daughter to you unscathed. Just like that fateful night at the gambling house. Bastian took a long drag from his cigarette, his blue eyes piercing into the Duke's. How dare you? How dare you? The Duke stammered, his anger boiling over. But Bastian remained unfazed, exhaling a plume of smoke into the air. Bastian gently rose from his seat, his movement fluid and graceful like always. He flicked the remains of his cigarette into the ashtray, then nonchalantly adjusted his hat. For a more refined conversation, I recommend you seek an audience with the Emperor, Bastian said coolly, offering a respectful nod before turning away. Duke Diessen's curses echoed behind him as the man regained his senses and smashed a nearby vase in anger. But Bastian remained unfazed, his strides purposeful and steady as he vanished from sight. He never once looked back. Middle. As the nanny drifted into slumber, Isabel breathed a sigh of relief. The sleeping pills had done their job, even though she had only taken a fraction of the dose, wary of any unintended consequences. She reached under the bed, retrieving the tightly wrapped package she had kept hidden. Within lay the carefully gathered garments of the maids, collected piece by piece over the course of many days. She couldn't simply wait for her fate to be handed over to Belov. The sense of helplessness fueled Isabel's resolve. Isabel was set to handle the situation on her own. She got sleeping drugs, pretended to be intoxicated, and hid from her nanny and servants. In the course, she discovered important information during this little period of freedom, including the maid's tea break, a young maid's approaching vacation, and the frantic movement of supply carts. These tiny nuggets of information served as her stepping stones to optimism and helped her get closer to her objective of meeting her beloved Bastian. She must meet him. Isabel made a pledge and quickly changed into new clothes. She made sure to place her pillows and cushions underneath the blanket to give the impression that she was sleeping. When she was ready to flee, Isabel approached the window with caution while pressing the brim of her simple straw hat. The nanny was still sound asleep while lying in a large chair. The other maids who drank the drugged tea with the nanny must have experienced the same thing that Isabel believed. "Forgive me, Nanny," Isabel whispered, pressing a soft kiss to the nanny's weathered cheek. "Please understand me." Her heart ached with a blend of sadness and determination, but she willed herself to keep her tears at bay. This could be her final opportunity to break free, and she refused to spend the rest of her life filled with regret. With swift movements, Isabel stuffed the money and jewelry she had carefully set aside into the worn bag of the servant. She had gathered enough supplies to last her for a sufficient amount of time. Isabel frantically rummaged through her possessions, searching for anything of value to help fund her escape. She desperately wished she could have procured more valuable trinkets, but her limited mobility had made it near impossible. With a heavy heart, she carefully placed the few items she had managed to gather, along with a heartfelt apology note, into her worn satchel. She hesitated for a moment as she gazed upon the glittering engagement ring from Prince Belov, but with a determined heart, she left it behind. She wouldn't let anyone, not even the prince, to blemish the pure love she had for Bastian. Her heart pounding with excitement and nerves, Isabel tightly clutched her bag and approached the bedroom door. It was now 11 p.m., and the back gate of the summer palace would soon be opening. This was her only chance, the moment she had been eagerly waiting for, and she wasn't going to let it go. Bastian. Chapter 22. Traces of violence. Ah, the beauty of youth, Dr. Kramer beamed, as he neatly tucked away the chart. Not a single red flag to be found. This checkup was a mere formality, just like the one last month. The doctor marveled at the remarkable progress his patient had made since his last visit. The surgery on his left shoulder, to extract shrapnel, was a distant memory, and the telltale signs of a previous gunshot wound were almost imperceptible. "You're good to serve in the front lines again, but I wouldn't advise it," Dr. Kramer warned, as he leaned leisurely against his desk. Bastian, however, was unfazed and merely flashed a grin before getting dressed. Scars, big and small, littered his body like a roadmap of battles fought and won, but with a deft hand, he expertly covered them with a smartly pressed dress shirt. Though, the scars disappeared, but the warrior within remained. "I have faith that the Admiralty shall only be privy to the bare facts, devoid of any personal biases," Bastian stated, as he meticulously fastened his cufflinks. Though a smile graced his lips, it was one of mere politeness, a fleeting facade to mask his unwavering resolve to venture forth once more. "Bastian," Dr. Kramer sighed, his voice carrying a note of concern. He initially encountered Bastian in this medical clinic on a late spring day like today. The air carried the aroma of roses as it drifted through the open window on a weekend afternoon. Bastian, Sophia's son, looked just like her late husband Jeff Clauswitz, the man who had killed her. However, Bastian's inability to avoid a fate similar to that of his mother made Dr. Kramer even less optimistic. Carl Illis stormed into the hospital, his grandson Bastian in tow, determined to unearth evidence of foul play. With fire in his eyes and tears in his voice, he spoke of how he had just rescued Sophia's son from a dangerous household. The old man declared Bastian as the newest member of the Illis family, vowing to protect the child from any further harm. This was a feud that had simmered for years, ever since Sophia's passing. The Clauswitz aimed to eliminate Bastian, the surviving son of their late daughter-in-law, while Carl sought to honor his daughter's memory by making Bastian his heir. In the end, the Clauswitz emerged victorious, much to Carl's frustration. Dr. Kramer, tasked with examining Bastian that fateful day, was taken aback by the twist of events. Twice over, he was left stunned by the family drama that had played out before him. As little Bastian was undressed, Dr. Kramer was greeted with a shocking sight. The boy's body was covered in a tapestry of scars, both old and new, testament to a life lived on the edge. Recent wounds, inflicted by a ferocious wild dog, were still raw and red, a painful reminder of Bastian's bravery. But it was the story behind the scars that truly took the doctor's breath away. Bastian regaled tales of tumbles from horses, sword-fighting mishaps, and daredevil hikes gone awry. Each scar was a badge of honor, a symbol of his daring spirit. Or so it seemed on the surface. For in reality, these scars were far from accidental. Each one was inflicted during the successor class, a twisted excuse for the abuse of young Bastian by those who sought to break him. "You've earned your stripes on the battlefield, my boy," Dr. Kramer said, removing his spectacles and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Why not hang up your sword and retire? I cannot in good conscience sign the papers that would send you back into harm's way." The doctor sighed heavily, the weight of his responsibility evident on his shoulders. "Peacekeeping and vigilance always come first, even on the front lines," Bastian declared confidently, leaning against the desk. The spring sunlight filtered in, casting a golden glow over the two of them as they locked eyes. "It's quite remarkable, considering the state you returned in," Dr. Kramer noted. "Ah, but that was an exceptional situation," Bastian replied. "And what if, heaven forbid, something like that happens again?" Dr. Kramer asked, concern etched on his face. Bastian chuckled. "Why, I'll just get myself another medal for bravery, of course." Dr. Kramer let out a hearty laugh at Bastian's audacious quip. Bastian wore a peaceful smile, but his eyes remained unreadable, just as they had been 14 years prior. Despite Carl Illis's tireless efforts to bring the Clauswitz couple to justice for their cruel and hidden abuse of his daughter's son, he never saw the fruits of his labors. The cunning perpetrators had covered their tracks, leaving behind not a shred of evidence of their wrongdoing. They masked their abuse behind the guise of succession education, hiding behind a grandiose facade. With lightning speed, Jeff Clauswitz tied the knot again after the untimely passing of his former spouse. His new bride soon gave birth to a premature baby in the 7th month of their marriage, but that didn't stop Jeff from putting his ex-wife's son front and center as his heir apparent. This bold move was his attempt to silence the whispers and dispel the dark clouds that had descended upon him following a mysterious occurrence. The Clauswitz couple tasked a select group of highly acclaimed educators to mold Bastian Clauswitz, their prized heir, into the perfect successor. Though the expertise was undeniable, the training was a ruthless regimen that pushed the child beyond his limits. As dawn broke, the young heir was already awake, dressed in pristine attire, ready to begin his day. The heavy workload and grueling physical training, reminiscent of military boot camp, left no room for rest. As a child, Bastian Clauswitz lived a life of relentless hardships. His days were filled with an endless stream of reading and writing, until his eyes were bloodshot and his hands swollen. Despite falling off a horse and nearly breaking his neck, he pushed through and mastered the art of horseback riding. At night, he was left to fend for himself in the forest, armed with only a gun in his still developing hand. Success meant a return to the cold, quiet emptiness, but failure meant a questioning of his very existence. For 6 long years, from the death of his mother to the day he arrived at the hospital with his grandfather, Bastian was trapped within the walls of the Clauswitz family, struggling to survive in a world filled with relentless challenges. "Your efforts are futile, my boy," Dr. Kramer declared with a sad smile. "The Admiralty's verdict will remain unchanged and I won't be signing any papers till fall. My hands are tied." The truth behind Sophia's death weighed heavy on Dr. Kramer's conscience. If only he had kept it shrouded in secrecy, Carl Lillis wouldn't have been consumed by vengeance. But now, it was too late for regrets. The path of revenge, once set in motion, was now an insurmountable task for the young Bastian. With a heavy heart, Dr. Kramer donned his glasses and gazed upon Bastian. The memories of the past weighed heavily on the doctor's mind, as he beheld the young man before him. Every act of violence leaves a mark, and the invisible abuse inflicted upon Bastian was no exception. Despite his best efforts, Carl Lillis was unable to bring the Clauswitz couple to justice, and finally, tears of anger and frustration streamed down his face. Through it all, young Bastian stood by his side, steadfast and unperturbed, a silent guardian to his grieving grandfather. As Bastian and Carl Lillis stepped out of the medical room, Dr. Kramer couldn't help but notice the scars left behind by the quiet torment he endured. "What do you think about settling down, finding a partner and starting a family?" In a sudden moment of impulsiveness, Dr. Kramer posed a question. "I'm not suggesting you accept the Emperor's arranged marriage. There are many other eligible women. Try to find someone who you love, not just a transaction." "I'll consider it, thank you for the advice," Bastian replied with a smile. Although the doctor was aware that he didn't intend it, he was at a loss for words. Dr. Kramer suddenly thought it was absurd to offer such counsel when he had long since buried the unmet love in his heart. Bastian gave his customary gracious goodbye. The doctor's office was engulfed in a lazy afternoon silence following the last appointment. Dr. Kramer gazed out the window, his eyes fixed on Bastian's departure. The young man strode confidently forward, his jacket slung over one arm and his gaze unwavering. Despite his simple attire, his posture was that of a seasoned soldier, commanding and sure. As the golden rays of the spring sun danced through his blonde hair, Dr. Kramer watched him until he was nothing more than a distant memory. In silence, he marveled at the grace and poise of the young man who had just left his sight. Middle. Odette spun on her heel and peered at her reflection in the window of the cafe across the street. With her hair styled and her blouse and skirt neatly pressed, she appeared presentable, but not quite fit for a formal occasion. The appointment was far too pressing to wait for Countess Trier's assistance. Her mind raced as she wondered where Bastian was headed and what he had planned. The letter from Bastian, sent by a personal courier the night before, contained only a cryptic note specifying the time and place of their meeting. "We will meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. in front of the fountain in City Hall Square." The curt, final greeting of just the letter K did little to ease her growing unease. It wasn't like she was heading to a fancy party, judging by the time and location. She made sure to dress appropriately, but as her appointment time drew near, she began to feel nervous. Suddenly, a black car appeared from across the street, slowing down and finally coming to a stop near the fountain. Odette watched warily, noting that it was not the same car that she had arrived in that day. She steeled herself, ready for whatever lay ahead. "Lady Odette." Bastian's voice echoed through the busy street, jolting Odette out of her thoughts. She looked up to see a sleek black car rolling to a stop beside her, and out stepped the man she had been waiting for. Confidently, Bastian strode towards her, his piercing gaze unwavering as the bustling crowds of onlookers seemed to fade into the background. "Hello, Captain." Odette greeted him politely, trying to hide the surprise in her voice. Bastian stopped in front of her, his eyes sizing her up from head to toe. He scrutinized her with a cold, calculated gaze, leaving no detail unnoticed. The intensity of his scrutiny sent shivers down her spine. With a haughty leer, Bastian cast his eyes upon Odette, his evaluation of her blatant and infused with aristocratic disdain. And with a smirk that hinted at his thoughts, he offered her his hand, inviting her to follow him. Confused and caught off guard, Odette gazed at him in disbelief, searching for an explanation for his sudden appearance. But as Bastian deftly took her parasol and tucked it away, she found herself being swept towards the waiting car, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. And as she settled into the plush seat of the vehicle, she realized with a start that she had just become Bastian's latest conquest. "Where are we headed?" Odette bravely inquired, but Bastian disregarded her question with a silent shut of the car door. With a furrowed brow, she watched as he calmly settled into the seat next to her, unfazed by his rude behavior. The driver respectfully opened the opposite back door for him, and Bastian slid into the car with composed ease. "Let's go." Bastian's voice, calm and collected, echoed through the car as the driver begins the journey without question. "We'll be around shortly." With a hint of insincerity, he offers Odette the parasol, which she gracefully accepts, concealing any trace of discontentment. As she was admiring the intricate design etched upon the parasol, the vehicle weaved through the bustling city streets. The car pulled up to its final stop just as Odette discovered a loose strand of lace adorning her hem. Swiftly, she tucked it away. As she looked up, she saw Bastian's hand reach out, offering her a glimpse into a world of glamour and opulence. The shop windows of the esteemed Sabine dress shop sparkled like stars before her, recollecting the memory of the clever test that the Count Brand's daughter had posed to her. Bastian. Chapter 23, Beggar Princess. "It has been quite some time, Bastian," Madame Sabine greeted with a warm smile that illuminated her face like a starlit sky. "Your aunt's message was a delightful surprise, and I must say, I am honored to be in your presence once again." Bastian, filled with delight, embraced her without a moment's hesitation. "Your kindness knows no bounds, Madame Sabine," he expressed with gratitude. "I cannot express enough how thankful I am for your gracious assistance." "Fear not, my dear Bastian," Madame Sabine exclaimed, giving him a fleeting peck on the cheek. "Maria's nephew is as much my own as blood could make him." And with that, she turned her gaze upon Lady Odette, who stood a pace behind Bastian. "A thousand welcomes, Lady Odette," she said joyously, her eyes beaming with warmth. "It is a privilege to extend my hospitality and offer my services to one so fair and refined." A brilliant smile illuminated her features, banishing any traces of coolness that may have momentarily gripped her countenance. Madame Sabine greeted Bastian and Odette with grace and then led them to the reception hall at the back of the mansion. It was there that an array of beautiful garments and fabrics were elegantly displayed, their vibrant colors and textures beckoning to be admired. As Odette stepped inside, she was struck by the full extent of the grandeur that surrounded her, realizing only then the magnitude of the situation she was in. "Should we start with the fittings and work our way up to the intricate details of design?" Madame Sabine inquired with a tone both extremely polite and purposeful. "Forgive me, Madame Sabine," Odette stammered, coming to a halt with an apologetic smile. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding. I did not come here with the intent of having my garments altered. I simply believe this to be a place where one might pay their respects to the captain's acquaintance." "Pardon me, could you grant us a brief intermission?" Bastian interjected Odette's speech with a polite request, to which Madame Sabine cheerfully agreed with a nod. "Take your time, I'll be here. Just give me a signal when you're done." She lightly touched Bastian's shoulder before departing with the team. The reception area was pin-drop silent when the door was shut from the outside with just the two of them inside. That was extremely disrespectful. Odette broke the silence by speaking first, voluntarily. With that, Bastian turned his head to see her sassy face. "Lady Odette, it seems to me that this is something for which to be grateful, not criticized." "Grateful? I'm sorry," Odette retorted with a question in an utter shock. She put on a brave face, but her quivering eyes gave away her unease. "Unfortunately, this establishment is fully booked until the spring," Bastian informed her. "It's only thanks to my aunt's close friendship with Madame Sabine that we were granted this rare opportunity. No matter how enchanting this place may be, I have no interest in accepting gifts from the captain." The notion of being compelled into receiving something is, simply inedible. Odette replied, her voice tinged with a hint of distaste. A gift? Do you really believe I am going to all this trouble to give you a gift? Bastian's calm, solemn voice erupted with emotion like a lava for the first time. Even the barest amount of decency was destroyed by the scathing mockery he brutally displayed. Odette was struck with speechlessness as she remained still, her eyes as big and round as saucers. While looking across at the seat in front of him, Bastian gently turned around and sat back down on the plush hospitality sofa. Odette resisted Bastian's arrogant request by remaining motionless. Bastian lifted the crystal glass from the table while cocking his head in a show of disdain. The sound of the translucent glass striking the ice reverberated throughout the space. I have no interest in trifling possessions, Bastian declared, wetting his lips with a sip of icy whiskey soda. He leisurely crossed his legs, the bright light glinting off his highly polished shoes, piercing Odette's hazy gaze. I demand nothing but the finest for myself, the priciest, the most luxurious, always. And, of course, Lady Odette is included in this standard. What's the point when I'm nothing but a charade? Odette spat out, the sting of the captain's words still fresh in her mind. You said that the entire event is just a prologue to Princess Isabel's wedding. Despite the cruel insult, Odette held her composure, her eyes flashing with righteous anger. Her heart was her sanctum, and she wouldn't let that unrepentant man sully it. It was the one shred of dignity she had managed to cling to, and she wouldn't surrender it to him, this easily. So, let me get this straight, you're saying that this decision to move forward with the marriage proposal was made with the awareness of the potential for rumors and damage to one's reputation, correct? I couldn't care less about the honor and dignity of a gentleman, Bastian said, taking a sip of his whiskey soda. So, you take pride in your noble ancestry, but for me it's all about the dough. He pulled out a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and dabbed at the sweat on his fingers. But, tell me, how do you think this will affect my standing in society? I mean, the whole world will soon know you as my bride. What if they discover that you don't even own a single piece of respectable clothing? Odette's eyes narrowed. I see your point. But when I go to official events, I always make sure to dress appropriately. And I fully want to keep doing so. Your attire is always a reflection of your grace and poise, Lady Odette, Bastian said as he delicately placed the used handkerchief on the table. And I know that you will continue to do so with the same elegance and impeccable style. I admire your commitment. He gazed up at her, taking in the sight of her pallid complexion, the glistening of unshed tears in her eyes, and the unwavering resolve etched on her features. Allow me to be candid, Bastian said, his brow furrowed as he regarded her unkempt appearance. The outcome of our previous endeavors was far from satisfactory. And I must admit, I have no interest in being associated with the title that precedes your name. It's a task, not a privilege. I believe that paints a clearer picture, wouldn't you agree? He sighed, the memory of her father's avaricious motives clouding his thoughts. But he supposed that's the reality of the situation. The notion of a beggar princess and her scheming father trying to extort money from him, it's all rather disenchanting. Lady Odette's life was a tangle of mess, much more so than Bastian had initially perceived. As the truth dawned on him, a glimmer of self-reproach crossed his face. He had been tasked with caring for this woman, but he had underestimated the extent of her troubles. But Bastian was not one to be deterred by a challenge. The realization only strengthened his resolve. He would have preferred to pay the price for betraying the emperor, but he had no regrets about his decision. It was a choice he had made, and he would not let it tarnish his honor. Bastian went out to find a solution since he was determined to make things right. He was certain that he possessed the tools necessary to remove the stain from his dignity and redeem his reputation. He was eager to get through this narrow setback because it was only temporary. Odette lifted her gaze after a prolonged examination of the worn tips of her shoes. Her eyes, now devoid of tears but rimmed with red, met Bastian's. The oddity of her youthful visage contrasted with the aura of despair that surrounded her was striking, especially given her lack of cosmetics. Is it not something we must both endure and comprehend? She said, her voice tinged with resignation. Forgive me, but I too detest that moniker that belittles the captain, Odette said, her tone motherly as she scolded Bastian. A slight smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he regarded her stern expression. Despite the gravity of the moment, she possessed an unexpected wit that never failed to bring a smile to his face. I kept my dislike for it concealed because I believed it was my duty in my role, she continued. I hope the captain can exhibit a similar sense of decorum. The grandson of a junk dealer, I suppose there's not much I can do about it. But with Lady Odette, isn't it different? Bastian lifted his shoulders in a nonchalant shrug. Let's focus on solving the problems that can be solved. There's no use in lamenting over what's out of reach. With a graceful gait for someone of his size and build, Bastian rose from his seat and approached Odette. I will fulfill my duty and Lady Odette will fulfill hers. Nothing more to it, he stated firmly. Odette stiffened at his words, unable to offer a retort. But Bastian seemed unfazed by her silence, as if it didn't matter. Bow low when you must, for that is true honor, Bastian proclaimed, spinning around to face Odette. Despite her efforts to mask it, disdain was written all over her face. She clung on to the remnants of her dignity, refusing to let it crumble and run away in that moment. As she struggled to regain her composure, Bastian summoned the staff outside the waiting room with a wave of his hand. Pardon the disruption, Bastian gracefully acknowledged, as he settled back into his plush sofa. Odette remained in place, observing the dreamlike scene unfold. With leisure, Bastian delved into his horse-racing magazine, while the staff bustled with activity. The stage was set, and the doll play began. Middle. As Odette stepped onto the podium, the light from the chandelier above danced upon her form, illuminating her delicate frame swathed in a sheer muslin gown. The assistants holding the tape measure were struck by her beauty, as they had already known she was a pretty woman, but the reality exceeded their expectations. Madame Sabine, the Grand Couture herself, stepped back with a sense of awe, surveying the scene before her. Odette's statuesque figure was a sight to behold, with her slender curves and clear skin captivating those around her. Her upright posture only added to her natural allure, a sight that could drive any man to madness. Social elites, renowned performers, and influential mistresses would barter their riches and reputation for a mere glimpse of true beauty. Madame Sabine, a seasoned tailor to the most illustrious women in the empire, had beheld many a fair damsel in her time. However, Odette's impeccable visage and elegant poise stood out amidst the sea of beauty. The tailor, armed with her tape measure, marveled at the harmonious proportions she called out, while an attendant meticulously recorded each number with reverence. Odette, a humble woman of modest means, astounded them all with her quiet grace and cooperative spirit, defying all expectations. Her poised demeanor was a testament to the true essence of beauty, surpassing even the greatest treasures of wealth and power. The final stitch has been made. The tailor's voice echoed through the tranquil room, breaking the hush. Gracious thanks. Odette rises with elegant poise, ready to return to the changing room. Madame Sabine nods with a pleased grin, fully comprehending the captivating charm that is Odette. Her every movement only adds to her already breathtaking beauty, illuminating why Bastian is so smitten. Odette appeared once again, her tattered attire a stark contrast to the opulence of the room. Impatient, Madame Sabine whisked her into the reception room, eager to begin the next phase of their plan. Bastian sat in the same wing chair, magazine in hand, as the duo entered the room. With a flick of her wrist, Madame Sabine summoned a team of assistants carrying bolts of luxurious fabrics. Bastian closed his magazine, fixing his attention on the women. Now, let's delve into the details, Madame Sabine said, her voice ringing with excitement. Maria Gross had expressed her concerns about Bastian's true intentions, but Madame Sabine was confident in her ability to gauge a man's character through his expenditures. Decades of running a dress shop had honed her skills to a fine science. She was certain that the money a man spent on a woman was a clear indication of his intentions. And she was eager to uncover the truth behind Bastian's actions. Bastian. Chapter 24, His Real Lover. As the sun set, Bastian Clauswitz had completed a hefty shopping list. He meticulously picked out every item from 1 to 10. Odette, meanwhile, merely shadowed his steps, dutifully taking measurements and serving as his silent muse. The finishing touches included fashionable extras such as hats, gloves, and shoes. Wait. Madame Sabine halted the duo as they rose from their seats. Digging through a mound of silk and chiffon, she discovered a lost pen. Lady Odette, may I have your address so I may inform you when your order is ready? She asked, her eyes twinkling with a hint of excitement at the prospect of delivering the much-anticipated attire. Odette calmly accepted the pen from Madame Sabine and said, "Indeed, ma'am." As the sun slowly fell below the horizon, the sound of the nib scraping on the paper filled the dressing room's warm warmth. Odette handed over the address book and made a polite request. "This is the address of a reliable relative who manages my affairs. Despite the brief appearance of surprise, Madame Sabine politely held off on asking any additional questions. "Shall we depart?" Bastian rose from his seat, offering Odette his hand with a debonair smile. Despite her inner turmoil, Odette took his hand without hesitation. After all, this was not just any ordinary business transaction, but a delicate dance of duties and responsibilities. She was determined not to fall behind, or be in debt to Bastian in any way. With a firm resolve, Odette clasped Bastian's proffered arm and stepped out of the dressing room. The team of discreet attendants, who had carefully packed their ready-to-go items, followed silently in tow. The trunk and passenger seat of the opulent vehicle overflowed with the first installment of their order, a mere fraction of the grand plan they had set in motion. The staff bid farewell with gracious goodbyes as they loaded the final bags into the vehicle. The pedestrians who had gathered to admire the grand parade of sumptuous gift boxes, now hastened to follow in its wake. "It will be difficult for us to eat dinner together because I have a prior commitment." Bastian started talking while everything was quiet. As she looked upon Bastian, Odette's countenance was devoid of any hint of emotion. It was as though she had already anticipated and rejected a dinner invitation before it had even been extended. Determined to keep her feelings in check, Odette mustered the courage to firmly decline Bastian's offer, even if it meant spending the evening alone. "Step back into the vehicle, Lady Odette. Hans will escort you home." Bastian spoke with a firm voice. "But what about you, Captain?" Odette asked, looking up at him. "I'll stroll on over. The destination is just a stone's throw away and it's quicker that way," Bastian replied, nodding towards a grand edifice across the bustling street. The Rheinfeld Hotel, a place where their tumultuous first encounter had taken place. Before Odette could utter a word, the chauffeur stepped forward, holding open the car door with a courteous smile. Though the thought was unsettling, there seemed to be no way to decline. It would be foolish to attempt lugging all that luggage on her own, anyway. The more she pondered, the more absurd the notion became. With a graceful dip of her head, Odette expressed her gratitude. "Thank you, Captain." She stood with her hands demurely clasped, showing her appreciation. In a mere matter of hours, the captain had lavished more on her than the Diessen family could spend in an entire year. While he may have claimed it was for his own appearance and prestige, the truth was, everything was being given to Odette. Odette reluctantly bent in submission, her mind trying to avoid thoughts of Bastian's enigmatic emotions. The atmosphere was extremely heavy with an unspoken tension, and she yearned to escape it at all costs. She quickly straightened herself, eager to break the awkward silence. With a burst of determination, she hastened towards the car. Bastian moved with fluid grace, just as the driver settled into his seat and revved the engine to life. Suddenly, a sharp rap on the window caused the driver to jump in surprise. He spun around to see Bastian, with a commanding presence, leaning against the car's window. "Unload every last piece of luggage at the Diessen residence before you depart," Bastian commanded, with a melodious voice through the partially open car window. "These gifts are sure to impress even the most discerning duke. Don't you agree, Lady Odette?" With his eyes gleaming like diamonds in the waning light, Bastian fixed his attention on the startled Odette. Her breath caught in her throat at the warmth emanating from his smile, as soft as a June breeze. Agreeing, Odette reassured the man with a voice devoid of feeling. Despite the embarrassment and discomfort that lingered, like the prick of 1,000 needles, she couldn't deny the truth in Bastian's words. "No need to fret," she continued, "I was set to follow the captain's command to a T." "Excellent, Lady Odette, your way with words is a blessing," Bastian said, his posture erect and proud. With a graceful bow of his head, he signaled his intention to depart. Odette, lost in thought, gazed at her fingertips, only to be jolted from her reverie as the vehicle took a sharp turn onto a bustling street. The city was alive with activity on this bustling weekend evening, a sea of people and carriages, now joined by the growing throngs of automobiles. Her abode was within spitting distance, but the gridlocked main street seemed to stretch on forever. That's when the man offered a solution, suggesting they alight and hoof it. "Ah, today's the day of a star-studded opera performance," the driver mused, stealing a glance at the rear-view mirror. "Traffic's a nightmare, but with a cast of renowned vocalists, it's no wonder the show is a hit." "Do not worry, I am in excellent shape," Odette smiled weakly, her gaze fixed on the street beyond the car window. As the leisurely rolling vehicle finally approached the Grand Rheinfeld Hotel, she caught sight of Bastian waiting outside. He was soon joined by a sleek black car, just as opulent as the one Odette was in, and without hesitation, Bastian stepped forward to assist a lady from the vehicle. Odette couldn't help but recognize the regal, red-haired woman, Sandrine, the Countess Lennart, who held a special place in Bastian's heart as his true paramour. Middle. Sandrine seems to be growing increasingly restless, Duke Olivier spoke, his tone measured and reserved. However, I long for the two of you to come together in a way that is graceful and complete. Time had passed, and the Duke's demeanor was vastly different from when they had discussed the intricate details of their joint ventures, railway operations and stock portfolio. I also think the same, Bastian replied with alacrity, assuaging the Duke's concerns. Olivier, who had been a ball of nerves throughout dinner, finally erupted in peals of laughter, his tension finally dissipating. I must say, I'm thoroughly impressed by your unwavering composure, Duke Olivier enthused, finally able to voice his worries about his daughter. You possess the kind of level-headedness that acts as a sturdy bulwark against Sandrine's emotional tendencies. Dinner had been interrupted by Sandrine's impulsive behavior, but now, the Duke could freely express his anxieties. Bastian kept quiet as he listened. Even though the Duke's distinctive accent made it difficult for him to comprehend, he decided against asking. Duke Olivier had no intention of extending mercy to the homosexual ex-husband of his daughter, Sandrine. He had destroyed her life through a fraudulent marriage, and retribution would come in the form of maximum alimony. Remarriage would only be possible after this matter was dealt with. Kindly comprehend the stance of our family and exercise patience, Duke Olivier implored. Ultimately, this was the crux of the matter, and Bastian was in broad agreement. The small price he had to pay was a trifle compared to the immense reward that lay ahead. My sincerest thanks for safeguarding my daughter's dignity, Duke Olivier sincerely expressed his appreciation, after their lengthy discussion. Honor was a word seemed vastly inappropriate for Sandrine. She saw her husband's male lover as a weakness, demanded a divorce, and was openly pursuing the next man. Sandrine was now likely lying in the arms of her latest lover, gossiping about her father and her remarried partner Bastian, who remained blissfully unaware of her true intention. Her current flame was a substitute singer at the opera house, just like the unknown painter from last season and the dancer from the suburban theater before that. These third-rate artists were all mediocre in talent and youth, but ultimately harmless. The public was well aware of Sandrine's escapades, and it was a minor deviation accepted with the silent approval of society. Bastian shared this view, seeing it as a trivial matter. Sandrine was a woman of exceptional wit, and she understood the true nature of love and relationships. She was a refreshing departure from the emotional and problematic women he had encountered before, and Bastian was grateful for her unique perspective. Despite her many lovers, he knew that her love for him was genuine and that it transcended the physical bond she shared with other men. He was also aware that her love for him was true and existed in a separate universe from the men who warmed her bed. With a heart overflowing with gratitude, Bastian thanked the Duke Olivier for his understanding and acceptance of Bastian's friendship with the Duke's beloved daughter. I am sincerely thankful to the Duke for acknowledging and valuing my bond with your daughter. As the Duke took his leave, memories of that fateful day came rushing back, cast in the warm glow of the street lamps that illuminated the city at night. The image of Odette's father, so filled with love for his only daughter, was at the forefront of Bastian's mind. Duke Diessen was a heartless and unfeeling father, who cared little for his daughter. He was skilled in the art of deceit and would sell his daughter to the highest bidder without a second thought. As Bastian wandered the streets at night, his thoughts turned to Lady Odette. He wondered if her life would have been any different had she been blessed with a loving and supportive father. It was impossible to imagine Odette living a life like Sandrine's. Despite her father's shortcomings, Odette von Diessen was not one to be taken advantage of. She was not the type to devise a scheme and fight back against those who wronged her. Instead, she would endure the injustice with grace, much like she had put up with her father's numerous flaws for so long. She put on a facade of being aloof on such matters, but in reality, she was a woman of great reputation who shone brighter than anyone else. By the time Bastian's thoughts had taken him down that path, he had already arrived at the corner of the road where his house stood. And that was when a gut feeling told him that something was amiss. The sight that greeted him confirmed his suspicion. A large group of police officers were milling about near his townhouse, and there were far too many of them to be just a routine patrol. The horses, especially, drew his attention. One horse, in particular, with its fine stallion and saddle, stood out from the rest. This was no ordinary police horse, but one reserved for the Royal King's Guard. Bastian's fears were confirmed as soon as the door to his townhouse was opened. In the wake of the recent ball, where the imperial princess had caused a stir, suspicious individuals had taken to prowling around his home. The presence of the king's guard was a clear indication that something was happening wrong. It was Admiral Demel who caught wind of the truth, that they were the undercover imperial guard. He warned Bastian that the emperor had his eyes fixed on him and advised him to steer clear of the princess. A heavy silence settled over him as he wondered why the emperor was taking such an interest in him now. With a deep breath, Bastian reached for the doorbell, suppressing the unanswerable questions that threatened to boil over. A few moments later, the door swung open, revealing the pale butler, Lovis. "Master, there is a serious problem." Lovis's hand shook wildly on the doorknob. "Her Highness, the princess has arrived." His voice trailed off, but Bastian didn't need any further clarification. The gravity of the situation was all too clear. "Bastian." A young woman dressed in maid's attire burst forth from behind Lovis, and to Bastian's shock, it was none other than Isabel, the emperor's troublesome daughter. Bastian. Chapter 25, where the arrow is pointing. Bastian let out a deep, throaty chuckle that echoed through the entrance hall like a peal of thunder. His eyes, as still and peaceful as a mountain lake, locked onto Isabel's, and a sly smirk played at the corners of his lips. It was not a friendly expression though, and Isabel felt herself shrink back, her feet frozen in place like an iceberg. She stood before Bastian, just close enough to feel the chill radiating from his piercing gaze. He cast a cursory glance at the bustle of the entrance hall, then, with a single, crisp nod of his head, he summoned the butler, who cowered behind him. The butler, sensing Bastian's intent, scurried to close the door, and the hall was consumed by a deafening silence, broken only by the sound of Bastian's amused breathing. Bastian, with a flick of his wrist, halted the scurrying servants who sought to flee the scene. He advanced towards Isabel, his steps purposeful and determined. Isabel's heart, once filled with excitement, now turned to ice as she met his cold gaze. "We're going to the imperial palace," Bastian declared, his voice devoid of any warmth or welcome. "Come with me." The words, spoken with such brutal efficiency, sent a torrent of tears streaming down Isabel's cheeks. She was overwhelmed with emotion at this reunion marked by such cruel disregard. "No, I won't comply," Isabel cried out, her hands shaking as she clutched onto Bastian's sleeve. "I have escaped that place, and traveled the weary road to reach here. You know nothing of the trials I have endured." "Sure, it appears so," Bastian sneered, his lip curling into a contemptuous smirk. The confusion that had once graced Isabel's features as a disguised princess was now replaced by disdain. Bastian couldn't fathom what could have possibly driven the princess to embark on such a foolish endeavor, or how she had mustered the resources to make it a reality. He felt a twinge of pity for both the emperor, who would soon be embroiled in this mess, and the crown prince of Belov, who was doomed to marry the mad princess for the sake of his kingdom. "You are sought after, and the emperor's arrival is imminent," Bastian warned, his voice stern. "You must depart before he arrives." "Bastian, I beg of you, speak truth to me," Isabel pleaded, her voice taking on a stubborn edge. "Do you still see me as a child? I comprehend that I may have appeared thus when we first met, but I assure you, those days are long gone." Isabel tossed her hat with a flourish, and it landed with a dramatic clatter on the marble floor. "Look at me, Bastian," she declared, her voice ringing with determination. "I am no longer a child, but a woman fully grown. And I am ready to sacrifice my crown for you, without hesitation. Your Highness, what concern is it of mine whether you be a child or a woman?" Bastian gazed upon Isabel, his eyes shining with innocence. "Is it because of your royal station? The disparity in our ranks? Is that why you cannot look within and consider your heart's desires?" Isabel asked, her voice laced with frustration. "Being a princess is a heavy burden, Bastian," she said, her voice rife with dramatics. "How I yearn to cast off this title, if only I could." Isabel indulged in a performance of heart-wrenching grief, playing the role of the tragic heroine. Isabel had always lived a life of privilege, appeared to be unfamiliar with the concept of rejection. She was a zealot, blindly convinced that the world owed her their love and adoration. The emperor's daughter appeared to have completely disregarded the honor of her cousin Odette, who was reduced to a state of impoverishment and was desperately fighting to maintain her dignity. Bastian loosened the knot in his tie, cocked his head, and looked down. He whispered in a whisper that only the princess could hear. "Allow me, dear princess, to offer a word of counsel from a place of devotion. It would serve you well to grasp onto that regal headpiece with the utmost ferocity. My demeanor, though tested in this moment, remains patient and considerate due to the reverence I hold for your status as the Emperor's offspring. Bastian said. Bastian. Isabel softly spoke his name, searching for answers. Bastian gazed upon her, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Your Highness, had you not been royalty, it would have been unlikely for you to stand before me with such poise and elegance. Isabel blinked, taken aback by his words. I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say. So, cherish the gift of your imperial lineage, princess. Allow me to impart this wisdom. Bastian raised his head, imbuing his words with reverence. The princess's hand, clinging to his sleeve, dropped with a sense of defeat. No way. This can't be the end. Isabel panted, her voice ringing out with a desperate plea. It was clear that the towering illusion she had built for herself over the years was unbreakable. What else would I do for you? I took a chance and left everything behind, all for you. Don't do this to me, Bastian. Please, have mercy. Your Highness, my heart belongs solely to the imperial family as a loyal soldier. This steadfast devotion has been unyielding and shall remain thus. The truth you so eagerly sought, this is it. With a collected demeanor, Bastian righted the cufflinks disturbed by the princess, sealing the fate of their relationship with a reserved air. The sound of the mansion's doorbell echoed through the halls, jolting Isabel from her dazed state. She stumbled, as if she had forgotten how to even shed a tear. With cool composure, Bastian answered the door to find a group of imperial guards disguised as police officers, taken aback at the sight of the princess being supported by the servants. Her Royal Highness is here, Bastian proclaimed, breaking the stunned silence. The guards' expressions were a mix of shock and confusion at the unexpected appearance of Isabel. I had intended to escort her back to the imperial palace, but now that you've arrived, I'll entrust her to your capable hands, Bastian declared, gesturing towards the disheveled princess. Captain Clauswitz, accompany us at once. The senior officer, commanding with authority, commanded, you are instructed to arrive at the palace as quickly and discreetly as possible. Middle. I'm grateful, sister. Thank you a lot. Tira threw herself at Odette, embracing her, excited and speechless. They had just set up to go on a weekend picnic together after a full week of pleading and begging. With a gentle smile gracing her face, Odette laid down the ladle she had been using to stir the bubbling stew. Her sister Tira was an endless font of excitement and energy, her eyes alight with wonder as she recounted out all the marvels she had heard about the new amusement park in the city center. Cotton candy and merry-go-rounds, the electric palace and horoscope machines, even the towering Ferris wheel. Tira's voice was overflowing with enthusiasm and eagerness as she recounted all the exciting tales she had heard from her schoolmates. In the face of such youthful excitement, Odette couldn't help but give in, her heart softening to her sister's unbridled joy. Don't forget, the date is next Sunday. Tira chimed in with excitement, extending her pinky finger for emphasis. It was her secret way of securing promises. Odette, with a smile, entwined her finger with Tira's, assuring her. However, deep down she hoped that the man who had been bothering her lately wouldn't contact her again. If he did, she made a silent vow not to answer his calls. It's a blessing that father didn't return, isn't it? Tira beamed with a childlike innocence as she took a seat at the dinner table. Though she knew her words were offensive, Odette found herself unable to scold her. After all, her own feelings mirrored Tira. With a dreamy gaze fixed upon the vacant chair that once belonged to their father, Odette proposed an adventure to her sister. Imagine a world beyond these four walls, just you and I exploring uncharted territories after graduation. Contrary to what Odette had hoped, Tira's face displayed a look of reluctance. Do we really have to leave? She questioned. Can't we just find a cozy home here and make a life for just the two of us? The bustling capital city is too hectic, and the cost of living is sky high. A quaint little town might be just what we need for a peaceful existence, Odette countered with a gentle smile. As Tira struggled with her thoughts, a reluctant smile graced her lips. Oh, I'll consider it, she said, before lowering her gaze to focus on the meal before her. The realization dawned on Odette, like a gentle summer breeze, that Tira was growing up and soon to be an independent adult. She couldn't force her sister to follow in her footsteps. Gazing out the window at the bustling city beyond, Odette tightly gripped her glass of water, lost in thought. In due time, Tira would be ready to embark on her own journey. She would have a job, a home, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. And when that day arrived, Odette could set out on her own path, unencumbered by any obligations or expectations. With wonder in her heart, Odette delved into the world of tutoring, discovering to her delight that it paid far more than she had ever imagined. The added perk of having her housing needs taken care of was a temptation too great to resist. Though she had no prior experience, the staff at the agency lavished her with praise, speaking highly of her skills. The prospect of residing in a picturesque town by the tranquil, warm southern sea filled her with a sense of longing. But just as Odette's dreams were starting to take shape, a familiar name shattered her peaceful thoughts, leaving her once again rooted in reality. "Sister," Tira exclaimed, a twinkle in her eye. "Have you heard about mysterious Clauswitz?" Odette's grip on her glass of water tightened, her calm demeanor faltering as she asked with a hint of unease. "Where did you come across that name?" With a heavy heart, Odette implored the cosmos, her words tumbling out in a desperate plea. Yet, fate once again dealt her a cruel hand, leaving her hopes dashed. Tira nibbled on her meal, nonchalantly chattering away. "Remember when Father said Clauswitz would handle everything? Well, a visitor stopped by when you were out grocery shopping. It sounded like it had something to do with money, but I don't know the specifics. I suppose there's no news if there's nothing noteworthy, right?" The mention of Clauswitz set Odette's nerves on edge. The fact that her father was familiar with the man could only mean one thing, especially if it involved financial matters. "Could you tidy up the table, please?" Odette rose from her seat, her legs barely able to support her weight. "Going out already? So soon? Where to?" Tira asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I have a meeting I overlooked." "I must go," Odette replied, a hint of urgency in her tone. "A meeting? At this hour?" Tira asked, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Yes. I need to return something to a relative of the imperial family," Odette explained. "Ah. That sharp-tongued old woman," Tira said with a knowing nod. Odette spun a web of deceit with ease, although her thoughts were muddled and confused. Thankfully, Tira readily accepted her fabricated story. With swift movements, Odette made her way out into the dark night. Her purpose was clear, to seek an audience with Bastian Clauswitz. This was the only objective that echoed in her mind. Middle. The suffocating silence was broken by a loud slap. Bastian took a tough stance and allowed the hit to land on his cheek. The Empress raised her hand once again as she prepared to strike him with her wrath, trembling with rage. With a steely resolve, Bastian braved the impending blow as the Empress, incensed and trembling with anger, thundered, "How dare you deceive my daughter?" Bastian calmly wiped away the crimson droplets from his wounded lips, steeling himself for the next barrage of insults and strikes. He had known the consequences of his actions, yet he never imagined the Empress's wrath would be so formidable, so physically punishing. "Steady yourselves," spoke the Emperor, who watched the tumultuous scene unfold from a distance. "In moments like these, it's important to maintain composure." With a gentle touch, he gestured for someone to guide the Empress to her bedchamber. The Emperor's command was met with swift action, as the servants surrounding the Empress hastened to carry out his request. With her eyes fixed coldly on Bastian, the Empress retreated, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. Though her actions were fueled by anger, she was still a better mother than her daughter. In the wake of the Empress's departure, a profound stillness settled over the private residence, casting a shroud of silence over the space. The Emperor, his face etched with a complex array of emotions, retrieved a cigarette, his gaze lingering on Bastian for an extended moment before lighting it. As the dawn broke and news of Isabel's escape reached the Emperor's ears, a maelstrom of anger and disappointment swept over him. Bastian Clauswitz, a figure who had brought both fortune and misfortune to the Empire, was the target of his fury. The echoes of a distant bell signaled the hour, and the Emperor snuffed out his half-smoked cigarette. Slowly, he shifted his gaze towards Bastian, his eyes burning with an unspoken question. As the first rays of dawn creep over the horizon, Isabel will be whisked away to foreign lands, banished from Berg's soil until her wedding day arrives. The official explanation for her hasty departure is to allow her to recuperate, for her delicate health has been shattered by neurosis and she needs time to heal before taking her vows. The Emperor sat in a leisurely manner on the sofa, his gaze fixed on the unlit fireplace, as he rubbed his tired face. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'll keep it in mind." Bastian nodded with the discipline of a dedicated solidor. "We have much to discuss. Please, be seated." The Emperor gestured towards the chair across from him, his demeanor weighted with weariness. Bastian. Chapter 26, The Hound of Devil. Bastian sat with unwavering poise, ready for his next words. His cheek still burned from the Empress's blow, yet he wore an aura of serenity, a remarkable display for someone who had been summoned and berated like a felon. The Emperor gazed upon Bastian with a furrowed brow, struggling to piece together the enigma before him. No evidence of treachery was found. The speculation that Princess Isabel's escape would lead her to Bastian Clauswitz's abode was accurate, but beyond that, nothing else matched the assumptions. Before the summer palace fell into disorder, Bastian sprang into action and made his way through the busy metropolis. He enjoyed a lavish meal with the influential Rats bankers before attending a small group of people at a prestigious social club. The fact that his guests had no link to the missing Isabel was obvious given that they were surrounded by powerful senators, bankers, and navy generals. As the afternoon sun beat down, Bastian made his way to his doctor for a medical examination, eager to assess the injuries he sustained during the fierce Battle of Trosa. With newfound energy, he then sought out the beautiful Odette, eager to continue his exciting day. Bastian journeyed to the pinnacle of fashion and indulged the young girl in a spree of luxurious gifts. It was an awe-inspiring spectacle to behold, but what truly took everyone by surprise was the sudden appearance of Duke Levier at Rheinfeld Hotel. Despite having a reputation for being a cunning opportunist who courted both the daughter of the Filia noble and the niece of the Emperor of Berg, it appeared that his relationship with Isabel was totally accidental. The implications of this information caused the Emperor to have a shudder down his spine. As Bastian Clauswitz lived out a weekend of self-serving pursuits, his daughter played her own game of thievery. Under the cover of night, she slipped sleeping pills into her nanny's drink and, disguised as a maid, made a daring escape on horse-drawn cart. The Emperor's heart was heavy as he watched the tale unfold, ending in the princess's public disgrace and embarrassment. Despite the Emperor's knowledge of Bastian's efforts, he couldn't help but feel a tinge of disappointment. By keeping the princess away, Bastian had effectively squashed any rumors and ended Isabel's foolish infatuation, but the damage had already been done. The Emperor couldn't erase the shame brought upon their family, no matter how hard he tried to silence the whispers. As the Emperor pondered the situation, he realized that it would have been much simpler if Isabel's actions could have been portrayed as a tragic outcome of her unrequited love from her youth. Such a scandal, though damaging to the Empire's reputation, could have potentially been salvaged with time. However, the reality of the situation was far more complicated. It was not just a problem limited to the foolish and impulsive actions of Princess Isabel. The ambitions of the man who had captured even the heart of the princess were now unknown, and the depth of their reach was a mystery that troubled the Emperor's thoughts. The idea that he could not even imagine the full extent of this individual's ambitions only heightened the ache in the Emperor's heart. "Ah, Captain Bastian Clauswitz, let us delve into the mysteries of your tangled love life. The first princess of Berg, Isabel. The daughter of Duke Levier, Sandrine. And the elusive Odette von Diessen. Are there any other ladies I should be aware of, or is your heart occupied solely by these three enchantresses?" The Emperor's tone was piercing as he aimed to uncover the truth. "Who, exactly, are you, Bastian Clauswitz?" "Your wish is my command, Your Majesty," Bastian replied with unwavering conviction. The honeyed tone of his voice and the unwavering gaze in his eyes added an air of sincerity to his smooth words, making them all the more convincing. "Will you carry out any command I give, soldier?" the Emperor asked with a hint of sarcasm in his voice, as he flicked open the cigarette box. "Affirmative, Your Majesty," Bastian replied without a flinch, his unwavering tone befitting of a true hero. The Emperor chuckled dryly, his laughter a cutting contrast to Bastian's steadfast demeanor. "How fitting. You truly embody the title of a heroic warrior." The Trosa Islands were jolted by the sounds of battle as the North Sea descended into anarchy. Berg was caught in the middle of a struggle for power and riches that was started by the ambitious country of Lovida. The ships sent to inspect the surrounding waters were suddenly set ablaze, leaving the crew with no time to react. The captain, who rushed to the scene, was felled by falling debris, leaving the ship without a leader. In the midst of this chaos, a hero rose to take command. Bastian Clauswitz stepped up, a man of action, ready to lead the crew to victory against impossible odds. The Emperor, watching in awe, recognized his bravery as he took control of the ship, guiding it through the storm of battle, cementing his place as a hero of the North Sea. With lightning-fast reflexes, Bastian Clauswitz took command of the situation, navigating his damaged ship through the raging waves of the North Sea. Despite the odds stacked against him, he refused to surrender, instead using his ingenuity to outmaneuver the enemy fleet. As Loveda's mighty admiral charged forward, unrelenting in his pursuit of victory, Bastian saw an opportunity. With a flick of his wrist, he deftly changed the course of his battleship, executing a daring frontal breakthrough that left the enemy fleet reeling. The panicked enemy ships were thrown into disarray as Bastian led the charge, his unwavering determination and quick thinking turning the tide of the battle. It was a moment of pure heroism, as this daring naval officer took the fight to the enemy and secured a victory for his beloved country of Berg. Bastian Clauswitz maneuvered his battleship through the conflict with expert accuracy, dealing an immediate and severe damage to Admiral Loveda's command ship. As Clauswitz's audacious gambit penetrated the enemy ship's bow, the unrelenting bombardment ended. His methodical approach, which avoided impulsive attacks that would endanger ally ships, turned out to be a brilliant one. With swords drawn and hearts pounding, the Berg army fought with ferocity and finesse. Amidst the chaos, the supporting fleet made their grand entrance, raining down a barrage of firepower that left the enemy forces reeling. With their line completely disrupted, the cunning and confident Captain Clauswitz made his move, apprehending the aging Admiral Loveda and accepting his white flag surrender in a triumphant victory. The news of the Trosa battle left the Emperor in a state of stunned disbelief. While it was a victory that brought pride to the Empire, it was also a confusing and overwhelming realization. The idea of war waged on the tumultuous waves of the sea was both awe-inspiring and bewildering. The Emperor stood in awe, as if he was witnessing a page ripped straight out of the history books come to life before his very eyes. He beheld the spectacle of a naval battle unlike any he had ever imagined, with weapons that had long been relegated to the annals of military science and lore. Grenades, swords, rifles, and pistols all clashed in a melee of steel and fire. The enemy screamed in outrage, as if Berg had unleashed the very demons of the North Sea onto their ships. It was a surreal sight, with the chaos and violence of hand-to-hand combat throwing the North Sea into a frenzy. And yet, despite the horror and shock of it all, the Emperor couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and wonder. This was a moment that would be forever etched into the annals of history, as the Devil's Hounds of Berg roamed the North Sea, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The thought echoed in the Emperor's mind, like a haunting melody. If the one behind the glorious victory at the Battle of Trosa had been on the other side, what kind of terror could he have unleashed? The might of Bastian Clauswitz was unmatched, his strategies unparalleled, and his cunning incomparable. Yet, what if those same qualities led him down a path of destruction? For now, however, the Berg army's hold over the North Sea had only grown stronger, and the defeat at Trosa had dealt a critical blow to Loveda's navy. There was no denying that Captain Clauswitz was deserving of the title of hero, his deeds already etched in history books. Yet, the Emperor couldn't help but wonder, what if the future held something far more sinister for this formidable warrior? As the Emperor gazed out the window, his mind weighed heavily on the formidable presence of Bastian Clauswitz, like a fierce dog that could turn and bite at any moment. The more he learned of Bastian's unyielding spirit, the deeper his apprehension grew. Bastian was a force to be reckoned with, unyielding in his refusal to bow to authority, but also cunning enough to manipulate it to his advantage. The Emperor couldn't help but wonder what kind of leash would be strong enough to tame such a beast. With a worried sigh, the Emperor rose from his seat and approached the window, peering out at the lush gardens and the tranquil Prater River beyond. Though he could sense Bastian's silent presence behind him, he refused to turn and face him. The stain on the honor of my daughter and the imperial family is not a mere trifle, but a weighty matter that carries the weight of the entire empire, the Emperor spoke with a regal bearing, his voice echoing in the grand hall. The warmth of a loving father was now replaced by the solemnity of a ruler, and Bastian felt the weight of his words as he lowered his head in understanding. The Emperor's gaze was firm, a reflection of the unyielding spirit that governed the vast reaches of the empire. The union of Princess Isabel of Berg and Crown Prince Leo of Belov was a necessity. Bastian, a seasoned warrior who had faced the tumultuous tides of international politics, understood this better than anyone else. In order to counteract the ever-growing naval might of Loveda, a partnership with Belov was crucial. The sacred bond of matrimony between the princess and the prince was the cornerstone of this alliance, built to withstand the storms of time. Your Majesty, I share in your hope for a successful military alliance with Belov, Bastian spoke firmly. The Emperor pivoted on his heels, hands clasped behind his back, his piercing gaze fixed upon Bastian. Let me make this clear, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Should Isabel's feelings for you interfere with this crucial alliance, should they pose a threat to the security of the empire, I will not hesitate to hold you accountable. It matters not whether it is your fault or whether you bear any guilt. Simply put, your presence has already caused irreparable damage to the imperial family. I have made plans to return to the front lines, Your Majesty, announced Bastian with determination. While approval from superiors is expected to come later this fall, a simple command from Your Majesty to the Admiralty would see me setting sail tomorrow. The Emperor's piercing gaze hardened as he questioned, "Do you truly believe this situation can be remedied so easily?" Middle. As the carriage approached the city limits, the number of passengers dwindled. Odette stood, clinging to a pillar by the door, as the lights of the sprawling metropolis flickered over her blank expression. The seats around her were largely unoccupied, yet one person was notably absent, Bastian Clauswitz. The captain was still with his beloved, far from the lonely carriage in the night-shrouded city. However, Odette, unable to depart, implored for a mere answer to the mystery of whether her father had ever graced the halls of the mansion. The kind-hearted old butler, taking pity on her, granted her request. Her father was nowhere to be seen today. Although the news provided her with a sliver of relief, it was quickly shattered when she learned that her father had once encountered Bastian Clauswitz without prior notice. Her heart plummeted at the unexpected revelation. Odette was happy that she had avoided encountering the man. She wouldn't have been able to handle it if she had actually met Bastian. She left a message in hopes that he would respond shortly. No, it was okay if she went unnoticed indefinitely. That was something she had kind of hoped for. As the carriage approached the final stop, Odette gathered all her courage and stepped out. She nervously smoothed out her dress, which she had fidgeted with several times during the ride, and brushed her hair back, trying to rid herself of any signs of distress. The effort was in vain, as the creases in her heart could not be erased so easily. But she knew that if she at least put on a brave face, she might be able to carry the burden of this life with a little more grace. With the pieces slowly falling into place, Odette realized the reason for the man's sudden mention of her father. She had long since been acquainted with her father's tempestuous ways, but the man's faith in a future promise left her grappling with confusion. Why had he placed so much trust in an uncertain future? The enigma that eluded a solution only served to plunge Odette deeper into despair. Regrettably, she realized she should have been forthright from the start. Odette was done with the charade, done with the thought of ever laying eyes on him again. Not this again. I can't take it anymore. With a heavy heart, Odette trudged down the moonlit avenue and entered the townhouse, only to be greeted by a loud, annoyed voice. It was none other than the spouse of the building superintendent. "For heaven's sake, go up to your unit and do something about the racket." The building manager's wife let out a groan, her frustration palpable. "What's going on?" Odette replied, taken aback. "Oh no, they fight again," Mrs. Palmer exclaimed, her eyes growing wide with frustration. However, Odette could no longer listen to her litany of complaints. She had to take swift action and put an end to the scuffle between her father and Tara. It was time to tidy up the chaos. With determined steps, Odette raced up the staircase, ready to intervene and restore peace to the household. She was all too familiar with this scene, one that had played out time and time again, yet her feet refused to budge. A fierce yearning to flee took hold of her, to spin on her heels and escape into the welcoming embrace of the night streets. To leave behind the familiar turmoil, to forget her father and Tara, and to cast off the chains of her societal standing that weighed her down. To wander far, far away, free at last. "I apologize, ma'am. I humbly request your patience," Odette said, with her head hung low, taking the place of her father and Tara in offering contrition. Mrs. Palmer, who had unleashed a barrage of complaints upon her, stalked away with discontent written all over her face, her steps echoing her dissatisfaction. With a heavy sigh, Odette quickly scampered up the staircase. "No way, let go!" Tara shrieked, just as Odette arrived at the top-floor landing. The force of Tara's scream was so intense that it took Odette's breath away. In the next moment, her father burst through the front door, with Tara clinging to him for dear life. "Let go!" Tara implored. "My money. Give it back to me. It belongs to me," Duke Diessen demanded with a roar. The argument between Duke and Tara over the box filled with their emergency funds escalated into a full-blown fight. "Father," Tara cried out, using all her might to push him away as he lifted his hand to strike. With a harrowing howl, Duke Diessen stumbled and tumbled down the steps, his fall a blur of motion. In the next moment, he lay motionless, his form twisted and contorted. Rushing to her father's side, Odette crumpled to the ground, unable to utter a sound. The dark red blood, pulsing and alive, spread across the wooden floorboards and stained the hem of her skirt. Tira, trembling out of fear, let out a fierce, guttural cry, shaking the very foundations of the aging building. Bastian. Chapter 27, Hero's Last Option. The Emperor's words hung heavy in the air, a threat veiled in casual amusement. "Surviving the night is not a guarantee," he said, his tone almost playful. "Heroes can easily end up as refuse in the alleyways, but that's just the way of power. Unfair, yes, but what can one do?" Bastian saw through the smile and knew the danger that lurked beneath. The tranquil existence before the Emperor's gaze was no facade. "I could be merciful," he mused, "and acknowledge your past accomplishments. But perhaps a compromise is in order, to quell that smug expression mocking the imperial family in our society. What say you?" The Emperor regarded Bastian like a surgeon preparing to operate, his intentions clear. "If the notion doesn't suit you," the Emperor murmured, turning to open the window. The breeze from the Prata River garden wafted in, rich with the fragrance of roses and dampness. "I suppose there is but one remaining option for our hero." Bastian awaited with patience the words that would bring about humility. This was indeed the Emperor's command. The one phrase that would determine his future was to be that one. The Emperor's eyes fluttered open, his voice firm as he issued his edict: "You are to marry without delay." Bastian, whose unwavering gaze had always betrayed his confidence, felt his eyes falter for the first time, unsettled by the suddenness of the Emperor's command. "I have set my sights on Odette to be your wife," the Emperor began, his voice certain. "But should you be unable to secure the daughter of Duke Diessen, you may select a bride from your inventory. And if, by chance, you were to elope with Count Leonard's wife, Sandrine, I would not fault you for it." Emperor waved his hand dismissively. "Regardless of the bride you choose, you must be wed before the summer festival begins. For 2 years, you must remain married to ensure that Isabel remains wed to Belov until the birth of their first child. After that, I will not interfere. Though it is my sincerest wish that your family be happy, if that is not the case, divorce is an option." "Your Majesty, the day you mentioned is coming up in just under 2 months," Bastian said. "As time will be scarce, but preferable to meeting a gruesome fate or enduring facial mutilation, wouldn't it be the wiser choice?" quipped the Emperor, leaving Bastian with a sense of detachment as he gracefully pivoted away from the window. "Join in matrimony, and let the world behold an impeccable duo. This way, should the Crown Prince of Belov learn of your liaison with Isabel, he shall not perceive it as a threat but merely a trifle. And in return, I shall reward you handsomely," proposed the Emperor, exuding an air of astute bargaining as he settled into the plush couch. "Why do you bear such a countenance? Did you not pledge to heed my every decree? Dare you deceive the throne?" interrogated the Emperor, his eyes ablaze with intensity. "Never, Your Majesty. However, this matter," replied Bastian, his voice trailing off as he grappled with the weight of his response. "As pledged, I shall grant your wishes following 2 years of wedlock. Be it a noble designation or any other indulgences that align with the Empire's tenets and regulations, they shall be yours. This vow is made in the Emperor's name and honor, and I shall uphold it," promised the Emperor, as the breeze carried the fragrance of roses. Meanwhile, Bastian gazed towards the Emperor, with his back braced against the gusts of wind. "This is my command. It's time to reveal Bastian Clauswitz's truth, to learn who Bastian actually is." Emperor growled. Middle. As Bastian stepped out of the Emperor's private residence, a soft light illuminated the sky, casting a blue hue over everything. He stopped in his tracks, taking a moment to gaze up at the tranquil dawn sky. It was as if time had paused, and the world was holding its breath. But the peaceful moment didn't last. Bastian felt like he was in a surreal dream, one that he couldn't quite grasp. He recognized the familiar sight of his bed and ceiling, but something was different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew that today would be unlike any other day. With a snide remark and a determined expression, Bastian set off towards the back gate of the Imperial Palace. The fragrance of roses mingled with the mist rising from the nearby Prata River, enveloping him in a heady aroma. It was a fitting metaphor for his current state. His role was as thick and heavy as the scent of the flowers. As he walked, his mind raced with questions and uncertainties. What did the Emperor want from him? What was expected of him now? Only time would tell, but Bastian was ready to face whatever lay ahead. "Master, are you well?" Hans, an attendant who had been loitering by the fence near the parked car, rushed over as Bastian emerged from the back door. Bastian ran his fingers through his tousled hair and took charge, putting on a smile without much fuss. Hans scurried after him and opened the backseat door, allowing Bastian to slip off his jacket and sink deep into the plush leather seat. As the weariness that he had forgotten washed over him, Bastian shut his eyes and let out a bitter laugh. The demands of his role had taken their toll, and even though he had put on a brave face in front of Hans, he was struggling to keep up. It was a reminder that he was only human, and even the strongest of men had their breaking point. "Please don't worry, it's nothing. Let's proceed," Bastian said with a weary voice, as he flung his tie over his jacket. In no time, the engine roared to life, and the car set off. As the vehicle made its way down the street, Bastian dozed off, lost in thought. It was only when the car passed by the Rheinfeld Hotel, on a Wednesday when the flowers were in full bloom, that he stirred from his slumber. This was the place where the Emperor had introduced him to the woman who was to be his companion. He gazed out of the window, his mind racing as he considered the dilemma before him. The woman presented to him by the Emperor was undoubtedly the most suitable option, but was she the right choice for him? He wiped his face slowly, lost in thought as he mulled over the same question that had plagued the Emperor. It was a difficult decision, one that would have far-reaching consequences. The Emperor's fury was entirely justified, and so was the decree that followed. Despite his initial misgivings, he understood and respected the Emperor's decision as the ruler of the empire. If he could secure the gains he sought by sacrificing 2 years of his life, then he was prepared to make the deal. Although there were obstacles to be overcome, such as the complications arising from the involvement of the Levere family, 2 years was a necessary period of time for Sandrine's divorce proceedings to conclude and for her to find a suitable partner. For now, the most rational course of action was to take advantage of the interim period to make a substantial profit, and then proceed with the marriage to Sandrine, sharing each other's divorce experiences on equal footing. However, Odette was the bigger problem, and it was a significant one that left Bastian feeling hesitant. In truth, she was the best candidate for the task at hand, and this only added to his consternation. Bastian loathed the idea of preying on a woman who had been cast aside by the world. The prospect of spending 2 years in her company filled him with an overwhelming sense of discomfort. Yet, in a society where fathers were willing to trade their daughters for a handful of coins, it was evident that there were no perfect choices. After all, whoever he chose wouldn't surely be a better option than Duke Diessen, the reprehensible nobleman who had tormented the kingdom for years. As Bastian mulled over the multitude of possible scenarios, the car turned onto a street that led straight to the townhouse. The first light of dawn had just begun to creep over the horizon, but the breeze wafting through the open car window carried with it a gentle warmth, as if a whisper from the coming summer in Berg. Middle. Lovis was pacing back and forth in front of the mansion, his eyes wide with anxiety as he waited for Bastian's arrival. As soon as he saw his master, he rushed over and posed the same question in a worried tone. "Are you all right?" It was clear that Lovis had been up all night, and the lack of sleep had taken a toll on him. With anxiety written across his face, Lovis asked him, "I'll make sure to get in touch with Admiral Demel for you. Take the day off and relax, you appear to be in need of it." "That won't be necessary." Bastian calmly waved him off before advancing inside the entryway of the mansion, tinge of fatigue in his voice. "Just give me a few minutes to rest my eyes. Let's forego breakfast today and get some hot coffee ready in an hour or so. That will be adequate." As Bastian made his way across the hall, he could sense the unease radiating from the old butler. But just as he took his first step on the staircase, Lovis stopped him with a surprising revelation. "There was a visitor last night," Lovis said, his voice hushed. "A visitor?" Bastian turned to face him, his curiosity piqued. Lovis reached into his pocket and handed over a visiting card and a note. His eyes widened as he read the name on the card. Odette Theresia Marie Laure Charlotte von Diessen. Bastian's gaze drifted from the visiting card to the note, his brow furrowing in thought at the lengthy name inscribed upon it. He barely registered Lovis approaching and speaking, relaying his response to the unexpected visitor from the previous night. "I carried out your instructions, master." With a deep bow, Lovis affirmed. As Lovis spoke, Bastian's mind was already racing with possibilities and potential consequences of this encounter. Suddenly, a memory resurfaced, and he nodded in affirmation, recalling the strict orders he had given Lovis before he had entered the palace. "Be silent about tonight's affairs." Lady Odette stated that she had a personal query, so I responded, Lovis said. Bastian unfolded the note under the visiting card and looked up at Lovis, his curiosity piqued. And what did Lady Odette ask? Lovis approached Bastian with an anxious expression. My lord, Lady Odette paid a visit last night and asked if the Duke had been here yesterday. I informed her that while he had come uninvited once before, he had not been here yesterday. I see. Bastian released a brief exhale, a hint of amusement tinging the sound. I humbly ask for your forgiveness as I now bear the burden of my father's misdeeds. I promise to do everything in my power to atone and make sure you never experience any trouble at his hands again. Please accept my apologies. Odette's careful handwriting was a stark contrast to the crooked lines that appeared to be written hastily. Lovis noticed the difference and couldn't help but speak up. If I have made any mistakes. No. Please relax. Bastian walked briskly up the stairs and into the bedroom while shaking his head slightly. Bastian threw the visitor's card and note on the table before first going to the restroom. When he exited the shower, the sunlight filled the entire bedroom. As the warm breeze flowed through the open windows, Bastian lounged in his loose gown, contemplating the events that were to unfold. The cigar box on the table beckoned to him, and with a sigh, he reached for it. The summer solstice had arrived, marking the beginning of the season's festivities throughout Berg. Bastian knew that on the day set by the Emperor, he would be wed. It was a fact that he had come to accept, but not without a tinge of bitterness. He cut off the tip of his cigar, accepting the inevitable fate that awaited him. 2 years later, the marriage that he had entered into would crumble and fall, much like the ashes of his cigar. And so, Mrs. Clauswitz, Tilda, the one who will provide him with the companionship he needed in those time frame, would quietly waiting in the background like the plants in his garden. And when the time came, she would vanish with a large sum of money, just as quickly as she had arrived. Bastian leaned back in his chair, staring off into the distance as he contemplated the situation at hand. He knew that finding a bride was not going to be difficult. There were plenty of women who were willing to agree to the conditions and pay. Just Odette. Just thinking of Odette made him feel something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. As he retraced his steps back to the starting point, the unwelcome face of reality scratched at his nerves like a sharp blade. The clock was ticking, and he had less than 2 months to find a bride. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Bastian took a deep breath and steadied himself. He knew what he had to do. To hold a wedding ceremony with minimal formality, he had to choose a bride within 3 days at the latest. And he was determined to make it happen. He sat in his leather armchair, a lit cigar dangling from his lips as he read Odette's note for what seemed like the 100th time. He couldn't quite understand why she had bothered to apologize in person. It seemed like a pointless gesture to him. Duke Diessen was a person who would remain that way for his entire life, and that was beyond of the woman's purview. It would have been better in that situation to blatantly walk away. Much preferable to leaving unfulfilled promises. As he crushed the note in his hand, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness. Why did Odette have to come into his life, only to make him feel this way? He tried to erase the memories of both father and daughter, much like a dirty stain that he could scrub away with enough effort. With a sigh, he brought the cigar back to his lips, the smoke swirling around him like a protective shield. His cheeks began to pink as he inhaled deeply, and the smoke he exhaled dispersed like a thought. Middle. Bastian sat at the long dining table, lost in thought as he toyed with his food. It was towards the end of lunch when he finally remembered her name, Lady Odette. The worst and the best thing to ever happen to him. Just as he was about to delve deeper into his thoughts, a sharp voice cut through the silence. I have an urgent letter for you, Captain, the officer announced, handing him a sealed envelope. Bastian had dozed off on the narrow cot in the break room, but was abruptly woken by the call of a duty officer who had come on an errand. The officer handed over a letter from Lovis, which Bastian assumed was a response to his instructions to bring Lady Odette to the mansion. After the officer politely saluted and left, Bastian eagerly tore open the roughly torn envelope to read the contents of the letter. To his surprise, it was not about the appointment time but contained news that was as sudden and jolting as a royal decree. Lovis had clearly put in great effort to convey the unexpected message. Lady Odette is unable to accept the invitation to visit the mansion to discuss the wedding because of her current circumstances. I've learned that Duke Diessen fell down the stairs last night and shattered his spine and cracked his head as well as other critical injuries. He is being treated at Ratz Municipal Hospital while unconscious. Even if he is fortunate enough to awaken, the general consensus is that he will be forced to spend the rest of his life as a paraplegic. Bastian's eyes scanned the note once more, his mind racing with the weight of the news it contained. With a deep sigh, he crumpled the paper and stuffed it into the pocket of his uniform. Lying back down on the narrow cot, Bastian closed his eyes, his body weary from the trials of the day. The weight of his responsibilities felt heavier than ever, and he wondered how he would manage to navigate the unexpected turns fate had dealt him. As he drifted off to sleep, Bastian knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of relief. Bastian. Chapter 28, Frail Bubble. If only he hadn't woken up. Countess Trier heaved a sigh. The anguished wails, almost resembling screams, had been echoing from behind the closed hospital door for what felt like an eternity. The heart-wrenching sound carried a weight of despair and seemed to seep into every inch of the sterile hallway, a haunting reminder of the suffering that lay behind the barrier. "I'm sorry, Countess." With a deep sense of empathy, Odette turned towards the Countess and uttered her apologies. "My father is deeply agitated at the moment, and I fear that it may not be the best time for you to visit him." Despite the overwhelming weight of the situation, Odette carried herself with grace and poise. Her unwavering composure, a testament to her inner strength, seemed to radiate a sense of serenity amidst the chaos that surrounded them. The Countess Trier's compassionate touch conveyed a silent understanding that transcended words. "There is no need for that," she said softly, offering a sense of solace to Odette. "I've heard that he may never walk again, so it's all right." In that moment, the frenzied screams that had been reverberating through the hospital corridors faded into an eerie silence, as if the doctors had taken swift action to calm the tumultuous situation. Despite the gravity of the circumstance, the Countess's soothing presence seemed to fill the air with a sense of tranquility, a balm for the aching souls that surrounded her. The once still form of Duke Diessen stirred, his eyelids flickering open to reveal a dazed gaze. The Countess realized it was wrong to wish for anyone's death. But as her attention shifted to the prospect of what lay ahead, a sense of melancholy crept over her. The thought of Odette's uncertain future weighed heavily on her heart, the burden of a life spent caring for her father now a very real possibility. The Countess couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for her shattered hope, the prospect of marrying Bastian Clauswitz. Who in their right mind would want to wed a lady doomed to a lifetime of unending misery? "Worry not about the hospital bill." Countess Trier's voice carried a reassuring tone as she made her pledge to the beleaguered family. "I will personally inform the imperial family and, if need be, I will implore the country to step in and assist." "Thank you, Countess." Odette's words were almost a whisper as she made her plea to the Countess. Her voice quivered slightly, betraying the depth of her shame. "I'm sorry to ask," she began, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. "But please, can you ask His Majesty to understand my situation regarding the marriage proposal? And also, the pension, it would mean the world to us." "My dear Odette," Countess Trier murmured softly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. As she gazed upon the young woman before her, her heart ached with a deep and abiding sorrow. Odette's lips trembled, a silent testament to the pain that lay beneath the surface. The room was suffused with a sense of helplessness, a feeling that seemed to permeate the very air they breathed. Even in the depths of despair, Odette's thoughts turned to the small pension that was her only lifeline. Countess Trier watched as the young woman's face crumpled in pain, the weight of her troubles threatening to overwhelm her. The memory of how she had once used that same pension as a bargaining chip to secure her agreement to the marriage proposal hung heavily in the Countess's mind, a bitter reminder of the cruelty and selfishness of her past actions. Fumbling for words of comfort, the Countess could find no solace in her own thoughts. Instead, she reached out and gently stroked Odette's cheek, a gesture of silent support and understanding. Before a slender figure darted down the dimly lit hospital corridor, her breaths coming in ragged gasps as she cried out a single word. "Sister." Countess Trier watched in surprise as Tyr approached, her heart racing with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "I'm sorry, Countess," Odette said, turning to the older women with a small frown. "Could you please wait a moment?" With a quick nod, she released the hem of her skirt, which she had been twisting nervously in her hands, and hurried off to meet the newcomer. The weight of the world seemed to be resting on the thin shoulders of the child before her, and it wasn't just the burden of her ugly, crippled father. Countess Trier felt her own heart constrict with a mix of sympathy and despair, as she gazed upon the girl's fragile form and the weight of her troubles. Her own breath caught in her throat, but she managed to give the child a small nod of encouragement. "Yes," she said softly, "don't worry and go." With those words, she watched as the girl turned and hurried down the hallway, disappearing around the corner and out of sight. Middle dot colon middle dot 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 middle dot colon middle dot. Tira's small voice quivered with fear and uncertainty, as tears still streamed down her face. Odette knew that the situation was dire and needed to act quickly. She quickly scanned the surroundings, looking for a place where they could speak without being overheard. Finally, she spotted a secluded corner in the hospital's backyard and motioned for Tira to follow her. "Sister, am I going to jail now?" "Huh?" Tira spoke after wailing for a lengthy period of time. Odette's eyes darted around nervously as she spoke in hushed tones, her words barely audible above the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Tira's tear-streaked face looked up at her sister, hopeful yet uncertain. "Father doesn't recall it," Odette said, her tone firm and unwavering. Tira nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. As they huddled together in the shadows, the distant hum of hospital activity providing a distant background, Odette continued in a firm voice, "I believe his memory is hazy because he was intoxicated. He thought he stumbled and fell. It is the truth if that is what he thinks. Oh, sister. Don't dwell on it. It was an unfortunate incident that was out of our control," consoled Odette. Tira's guilt consumed her as she confessed, "But I was the one who pushed father with my own hands." "Quiet, Tira," Odette snapped at her. "I'm absolutely terrified." Tira's body shook uncontrollably as she expressed her terror. What if someone in the building witnessed what happened, even if father doesn't recall it? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Tira's anxiety only escalated as she speculated, "It must have been the case. The manager's wife despises me so much. She could have been observing me on that day. She saw everything. I believe she was lurking behind me, sister, concealing herself behind the stair railing." "Tira, please," Odette pleaded desperately. "I cannot bear this anymore. I am going to the police station right away. Perhaps, if I surrender and confess, the punishment will be less severe. I am utterly petrified, and I feel like I'm descending into hell. I'll have to tell father everything, sister." Slap. Tira's frenzied behavior was abruptly halted by a forceful smack across her cheek, causing her to reel from the impact. "Pull yourself together, Tira." Odette's voice rang out, commanding her attention, as she grasped Tira's shoulders with an unwavering grip. Despite being terrified and on the verge of tears, Tira strained to listen closely. "What you did was justified self-defense. Regardless of what anyone else may say, that remains an undeniable fact. Sister." Tira called out to her sister with a plaintive cry. "I may not be a religious person, but even if a higher power exists, they would not condemn you to eternal damnation for this. If someone has to suffer the consequences, I'll be the one to do so. Do you comprehend what I'm saying?" Surveying their surroundings one last time, Odette fixed her gaze on Tira. "I don't want you to carry the burden of something that is now beyond our control. I do not want to see you unhappy." Odette's touch was gentle as she wiped away Tira's tears, unlike the roughness of the slap that had struck her moments ago. "Promise me that you will keep this a secret. Do it for me, please." Her voice was soft and pleading as she made her request. "Yes." Tira's response was barely audible, a soft moan-like sound escaping her lips as she acquiesced. She was consumed with remorse and could barely choke out the words, "I'm so sorry, sister." Tira's anguished expression contorted with pain as she clung to Odette, seeking comfort and solace in her sister's embrace. With eyes tightly shut, Odette enveloped the trembling child in her arms, offering a sense of protection and stability. Tira's tears flowed relentlessly, drenching Odette's blouse as she wept uncontrollably. As the cries began to fade, the rustling of the leaves punctuated the stillness that descended upon them. Odette held Tira for what felt like an eternity, her own fear and anxiety bubbling beneath the surface, but she was determined not to reveal it. For Odette, love was a responsibility, and her faith gave her the strength to bear it. As Tira's sobs eventually subsided, Odette regained her composure and wiped away the traces of tears on her little sister's face with her sleeve. Straightening Tira's tousled hair and fixing her crooked collar, she exhaled a deep breath and gathered her resolve, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Let's head back." Odette grasped Tira's hand, her fingers intertwined with her little sister's, and led her away from the backyard. As they made their way through the hospital corridors, the sounds of their footsteps echoed off the walls, reverberating through the emptiness around them. With each step they took, Tira's sobs gradually tapered off, until even the faintest sound of a sniffle had ceased by the time they reached the second floor where their father's room was located. The silence was deafening, and Odette's grip on Tira's hand. Countess Trier sat on a chair in the hallway, waiting for the two sisters to return from their discussion. As soon as she saw them, she stood up and approached them with a purposeful stride. "Did the conversation go well?" she inquired, her sharp gaze fixed on Odette and Tara. Before Odette could respond, she was interrupted by the Countess's stern voice. "If you say sorry one more time, I will get angry." The old lady's firm tone left no room for argument, and Odette quickly suppressed the urge to apologize once more. "The physician foretold that it shall take a span of 3 to 4 hours more for your father to regain consciousness from the sedative. However, worry not, for I will designate a vigilant sentinel to keep watch over his ailing frame. As for you, my dear Odette, it appears that you have been tending to your father without rest for several sunsets. I implore you to retire to your quarters and allow your weary mind and body to mend. Only then will you be equipped to persevere through this ordeal." Countess Trier implored. "Your concern is much appreciated, dear Countess, but rest assured that I am in good spirits," Odette replied. "Pardon me for contradicting, but you seem to be far from fine," remarked the Countess. "May I be so bold as to make a humble request? If it's not too much trouble, would you be willing to take Tira instead of me?" inquired Odette after pondering for a moment, making her plea with prudence and care. It was only upon closer inspection that Countess Trier became aware of the disheveled young girl concealed behind her sister's back. Tira, the half-sister of Odette, gazed upon the Countess with timidity, lowering her head and greeting her in a meek and subdued tone. Despite her untidy appearance, Tira exuded an aura of humility, far from resembling a pampered child. "I fear it would be challenging to leave Tira behind, as she is still in a state of shock, and there's no one at home to attend to her," remarked Odette, expressing her concerns about leaving the child behind. "Very well, then. Let us proceed with your proposal. I will take the child under my wing," Countess Trier assented hastily, her heart touched by Odette's affectionate treatment of her half-sister, despite the scant age difference between them. The Countess could perceive the hardships that Odette had endured in her past, and it softened the heart of the normally stern and austere old lady. "Rather than persisting with such folly and obstinacy, I implore you to come to my residence and rest for the night. A true lady should know when to relinquish the facade of strength during challenging times," urged the Countess, urging Odette to set aside her pride and prioritize her well-being. "Indeed, Countess. Your counsel is wise," replied Odette with a weak smile and a wan complexion, nodding her head in agreement. Though hesitant, she mustered the courage to express her gratitude, uttering the words, "Thank you, Countess." As she spoke, a sense of apprehension colored her voice, and the Countess could not help but notice the young lady's frailty. Countess Trier's aged lips curved into a gentle arc as she gazed blankly at Odette, pondering the young lady's countenance. In that moment, the Countess could not help but observe that the abandoned princess's daughter was far more deserving of the title princess than her own mother. She was very saddened by the realization. Middle colon middle colon middle. The sun shone bright in the sky, casting a warm glow across the hospital courtyard. It was a serene spring afternoon, and Odette sat on a verdant bench with peeling paint in certain spots, gazing wistfully at the lush flower beds before her. As she looked on, the vibrant blooms seemed to sway in the gentle breeze, their colorful petals resembling the flowing dresses of graceful dancers. The air was thick with the heady fragrance of roses and honeysuckle, enveloping her in a sweet embrace. It was a time when everything turned to gold, and yet Odette remained a solitary figure, estranged from the beauty of the spring festival. The world was an indifferent place, showing no regard for the mere mortals that roamed its surface. This was a truth that Odette had come to accept, much like how the passage of time brought about the blooming and withering of flowers, the shifting of seasons, and the capriciousness of the weather. In this ruthless and unyielding order, there was little room for an individual's joys or sorrows. It simply was what it was. Even if rain had fallen on this day, it would have made no difference to Odette's mood. The only change would have been the catalyst for her sense of isolation, which had now evolved into a feeling of monotony, a sense of being trapped in an unchanging pattern. She was intimately familiar with the feeling of hopelessness and despair. It was a constant companion that trailed behind her like a shadow, always lurking around the corner. She knew that the world was indifferent to the struggles of ordinary people like herself, and that life was often cruel and unfair. Yet even with this knowledge, there were moments when Odette couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by her own weakness. Today was one of those times. The world around her was too beautiful, too perfect, and too heartbreaking. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the flowers were in bloom, but none of it brought her any joy. Sitting on the weathered bench, Odette stared out at the idyllic scene with the expression of a lost child. Her once neatly braided hair had come undone, but she didn't bother to fix it. What did it matter, when everything else in her life was falling apart? Odette paid no attention to her crumpled clothes and dusty shoes, nor did she care about her disheveled hair. Even her mother, who was obsessed with maintaining appearances, couldn't have found fault with Odette's current state. Meanwhile, Thierry had been taken to Countess Trier's house while their father was passed out from sedatives. It brought a temporary sense of peace, but Odette knew it wouldn't last long. A fierce wave of turmoil would soon consume her once again. As she sat on the bench, feeling as fragile as a bubble that could burst and disappear at any moment, the sound of approaching footsteps caught her attention. The footsteps grew louder until they came to a halt at the edge of the bench where Odette sat, her head down. When she looked up, the first thing that caught her eye was a long shadow cast over her feet. The glaring brightness of the white shoes pierced through Odette's eyes, a familiar sensation that triggered a sense of foreboding. Slowly, her gaze climbed up the long legs, wrapped in pants of the same color as the shoes, until a white jacket emerged. It was followed by a more dazzling display of light, a golden belt, splendid medals and insignia, shoulder straps and epaulets made of gold thread. As soon as Odette recognized the decorations that symbolized soldiers' honor, her gaze reached the face of the man standing before her. Bastian Clauswitz. He towered over her, his vivid blue eyes shining in the bright sunlight. Slowly, he took off his hat, revealing his tousled blonde hair, and looked down at the stunned Odette. As if a spell had been broken, the sound of Bastian's voice snapped Odette out of her daze. His words were a sharp reminder of the harsh reality she was facing. Slowly, she lifted her head to face him and offered a silent bow, a gesture of gratitude and respect. In response, Bastian inclined his head in a show of acknowledgement and sympathy. "I was told about the accident," he said, his voice low and somber. "I feel bad for the Duke's poor fortune." Bastian's words cut through the air with an urgent tone, demanding Odette's attention. "Lady Odette, I must speak with you. It's a matter of great importance." His words left no room for argument or hesitation. Bastian. Chapter 29, A Stain Beside Him. As Bastian wrapped up his introduction, he presented a folder and urged the recipient to peruse its contents. "Here is a document that captures the core of our conversation. I beg you to carefully review it and offer your comments," he stated and handed the paper across. Within the pages lay a succinct agreement encapsulating all the important points he had just discussed. With ease, Bastian had conveyed the complexities of safeguarding the demanding princess, having been intimately acquainted with the challenges himself. The mandate from the emperor was clear: a matrimonial bond must be forged, and a 2-year commitment was required. Rest assured, ample compensation would be provided for the chosen one. And as I pondered over the ideal candidate, my thoughts settled upon you, for it seems that you possess all the qualities required for the task at hand. Should you choose to accept, the ceremony shall be formalized at the end of the upcoming month. At its core, the matter was uncomplicated, and the average person would have grasped it with ease, a fact not lost on Bastian, who perceived the woman to possess sufficient acumen. Unfortunately, what she lacked was the fortitude to act upon the information imparted to her. "I am willing to explain further, should the need arise," Bastian offered. The tense hush was broken by Bastian's measured tone, and after a protracted spell of staring blankly at the folder, Odette lifted her head. Though her apparent indecision was testing Bastian's patience, he proceeded with a composed demeanor, mindful of her predicament and the challenges she faced. With a lull in the conversation, Odette posed a query to Bastian: "So, is it safe to assume that you intend to propose to me?" As the initial shock subsided, Odette blinked her dazed eyes, seeking to make sense of the situation at hand. After a brief pause, she finally found her voice. "If I may interject, I believe the term contract would be more fitting in this instance. Essentially, what I am proposing is gainful employment," Bastian explained, clarifying the nature of the arrangement. "Is this the novel form of philanthropy you are practicing, Captain?" Odette responded with a sardonic chuckle, as she processed the unusual circumstances, a chance encounter with a stranger who appeared out of the blue at the hospital where her ailing father was being treated, offering her employment. Despite her reservations, she remained rooted to the spot, lacking the fortitude to walk away from this crazy man with such an intriguing proposition. As the initial sense of disorientation faded away, Odette finally focused her gaze upon the man standing before her. It was none other than Bastian Clauswitz, who was now broaching the subject of purchasing a bride with his vast wealth, a sham of a wife, meant to serve as nothing more than a disposable bargaining chip in a deal with the Emperor, lasting a mere 2 years. The giddiness intensified, causing Odette to falter and seek refuge on the nearby bench, as she struggled to catch her breath. In a moment of concern, Bastian approached her. Once more, he offered the documents, this time with a more resolute air. "I realize that this is a trying time for you, but I implore you to approach this matter with an open mind," he advised, urging Odette to consider his proposition. "Are you suggesting that you are doing me a favor?" Odette was quick to respond, her voice laced with skepticism, unconvinced by his appeal. Bastian knelt and dropped the contract onto Odette's lap. "It is comforting to know that you possess a measure of logical reasoning," he maintained his detached demeanor as he provided a dispassionate account of the situation. "The wedding has been scheduled by the Emperor and I have identified several prospective candidates. I intend to make a final selection by the end of today," he stated, his blue eyes remaining steadfast and unwavering. Despite her anger, Odette found herself unable to respond in kind in the face of his unyielding composure. Bastian spoke in a matter-of-fact tone, his words cutting through the air with precision. He seemed completely unaffected by Odette's presence or the absurdity of what he was proposing. "Your looks and background make you the most suitable candidate for this arrangement. And, our previous acquaintance will make it easier to expedite the wedding. I was uncertain at first, but now I am confident that you are the best choice." Odette felt a knot form in her stomach as Bastian spoke. "If you're unsure," she interrupted. "Putting Lady Odette first would have been challenging if not for your father's accident. It's safe to claim that the one decent thing Duke Diessen did for his daughter was to break his back." Bastian gazed steadily at Odette as he spoke his unvarnished truth. Despite her contemplative expression, he didn't hesitate to voice his thoughts. While Odette would undoubtedly excel in the role of a trophy wife, he was hesitant to deal with her father's potential troublemaking. It was a simple fact, and he had no qualms about stating it. Had Duke Diessen not been bedridden for the foreseeable future, Bastian wouldn't have bothered to visit this place with his proposition. "In case you harbor illusions of marrying for love, feel free to decline. However, if that's not a concern for you, in my opinion, Lady Odette, this arrangement wouldn't be a bad deal," Bastian stated coolly, his attention momentarily drawn to his watch. He realized that he had already spent more time than intended on this matter and needed to focus on his top priority. Bastian didn't beat around the bush and spoke plainly about the harsh reality of Odette's situation. "Once your father is released from the hospital, you will be responsible for caring for him at home because your family's financial position prevents you from hiring nurses or servants. Furthermore, it's not like you have a close enough bond with your father to give up the rest of your life to care for his disability while relocating from one home to another. Am I misleading?" Bastian's eyes flickered over to the document on Odette's lap, then back to her face. He was growing bored with this pointless back and forth, so he decided to cut to the chase. He wanted to make Odette understand the gravity of her situation, and he did so with ruthless efficiency. As he spoke, Odette's knuckles turned white from the intensity of her grip. But Bastian noticed something else happening to Odette as well. Her body was trembling, and her face was contorting into a look of pure desperation. She looked like a fragile glass figurine, perched on the edge of the shelf, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Bastian knew what was coming next. If Odette refused his offer, she would be left with nothing. No money, no home, no future. She would be like a broken doll, discarded and forgotten. But Odette surprised him. Despite the tears that shimmered in her eyes, she didn't cry. Instead, she looked up at him with a familiar strength. It was the same look she had given him on the night she was sold into a life of gambling and vice. Bastian sent a look of courteous disinterest while patiently waiting. Odette's bloodless hands finally opened the papers just a short while afterwards. Middle. Odette's heart sank as she finished reading the contract. This wasn't a marriage in any sense of the word. It was a business transaction, a deal, a cold arrangement between two strangers. They were to live together, but their relationship was to be devoid of any real intimacy. No shared bed, no touches, no love. It was a life of complete loneliness, with only the public facade of a happy couple to keep up. 2 years of living like this would change them forever. As she closed the document, the true reason for Bastian's seeming generosity became clear. Odette's heart raced as she studied Bastian Clauswitz, his once pristine white uniform now stained with the fiery hues of the setting sun. The man beside her was no longer the charming businessman she had met before. Something about him had changed, and his mere presence now filled her with an icy dread. Bastian sat with his legs crossed, staring off into the rose garden. Odette couldn't help but feel as though he was staring straight through her, his gaze piercing and unforgiving. Suddenly, she realized just how little she truly knew about this man. It dawned on her that Bastian was a force to be reckoned with. He was willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted, even if it meant risking his own life. He was unpredictable, uncontainable, and utterly beyond her control. Odette realized that the rumors circulating among high society about Bastian's power were not just hearsay, they were the truth. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Odette couldn't shake the feeling of trepidation that had settled in her chest. This man, Bastian Clauswitz, was not to be trifled with. The world was a well-ordered tree, towering over all who inhabited it. Many people struggled to survive, clinging to the branches, willing to be pruned by the forces that controlled their fate. But not Bastian Clauswitz. He was a wild and unyielding vine that refused to be tamed or trimmed. He had grown from the broken twigs and snaked around the trunk of the tree, his strength and tenacity threatening to strangle the very life out of it. Gardeners feared such plants, knowing they could take over and destroy the very foundation they depended on. Does the deal with His Majesty really warrant such a hefty cost? Odette's hushed voice delicately pierced the fragrant air. Bastian's head turned slowly, his emotionless smile silently affirming her assumption. Once the 2-year contract is up, Countess Lennart will most likely be the one to marry the captain, isn't that right? Odette asked. Her thoughts gradually sharpened, and with a clearer mind, she posed the question to Bastian, who gave an honest response without hesitation. Indeed, by then Sandrine would have settled her own marriage as well, Bastian replied with his characteristic honesty. Does the relationship between the captain and Countess Lennart remain valid during the duration of our marriage contract? I mean, Odette asked, her voice uncertain. In all situations when we identify as husband and wife, I will prioritize my wife's rights. But Sandrine de la Vere is much more significant to me in my personal life, and that won't change. Bastian implored. He explained the situation clearly. The day had finally arrived when Odette's fate would be sealed. She sat in front of the contract, her eyes scanning the fine print while her thoughts drifted away. She was well aware of the gravity of the situation, but it seemed like the roles had reversed. Her husband's mistress had become the new queen, and she, the once revered wife, had been relegated to a mere pawn. However, Odette remained calm, fully aware of the farce that was their marriage. Everything was a lie, and there was no point in applying common sense to a relationship that was built on deceit and manipulation. Odette's gaze lowered to the paper once again. As long as she signed it, her father could spend the rest of his life in a well-equipped convalescent hospital, and Tira, her half-sister, would receive a good education at a prestigious boarding school. It was an opportunity to break free from the shackles that had bound her for so long. The money that came with the deal would allow her to start anew, to build a life that was truly her own. Odette hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was worth it. But deep down, she knew that it was foolish to pass on this chance. Odette's hand hovered over the fountain pen, her eyes scanning the file folder. She knew that this decision would change the course of her life, but she couldn't make up her mind. It wasn't a matter of morality or honor, those notions had long since lost their hold on her. No, it was fear that gripped her, fear in its most visceral form. Just one day. I need time to consider, Odette requested, with trembling in her voice. As I said, I don't have much time. Bastian's response was curt. He stood up from the bench, cutting off any further discussion. Are you refusing? Bastian glanced at his watch and asked. His demeanor was chilly, and he seemed ready to move on to the next candidate if Odette so much as nodded. If that's the case, he continued, then I'll. No. With an impulsive burst of energy, Odette's response was resounding. She ardently shook her head, causing Bastian to take a step back as if to convey a willingness to grant a temporary suspension. The intensity of her refusal seemed to give Bastian pause, at least for the moment. Odette's hand trembled as she gripped the fountain pen, unsure if she was making the right choice. The prospect of tomorrow was daunting, but the despair of today was suffocating. She knew that no matter what the next 2 years brought, it would be better than the reality she would face if she missed this opportunity. With that thought in mind, she made her decision. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, steadying herself as she straightened her grip on the fountain pen. The ink on the tip of the nib bled, creating a stain as it fell onto the signature line of the contract. But Odette didn't falter. For her, It was a small price to pay for a better ending than disappearing into nothingness. As she finished signing her name, she felt a sense of resolve wash over her. She may have been scared, but she was determined to see this through. The ink on the contract may have stained her hands, but it couldn't stain her spirit. Odette raised her head and examined Bastian's expression, hoping for a sign that he was pleased with her decision. But his face was as emotionless as ever, standing with his back to the sunlight. Uncertainty filled her, and her fingertips began to tremble. The exhaustion from the past 3 days, where she couldn't eat or sleep, washed over her all at once. Despite her weakened state, Odette summoned all her strength and focused on writing her name next to his on the contract. With a final stroke, she released her grip, and the pen fell to the floor. She was barely conscious of Bastian as she did so. But to her surprise, Bastian picked up the pen and retrieved the contract. After examining the signature line once more, he covered the folder, announcing the successful conclusion of the contract. A tearful sigh erupted at that precise time. Odette hunched down and appeared to be about to pass out while exhaling heavily. "Could you walk?" Bastian's question echoed in Odette's deaf ears. She was unable to respond verbally, but she managed a small nod of her head. Suddenly, she felt weightless and realized that she was being lifted into the air. In a moment of surprise, she opened her eyes to find herself cradled in his arms. Bastian cast a quick glance at Odette before striding purposefully towards the hospital. Uncertain and overwhelmed, Odette buried her face in his shoulder, not sure what to do next. She was physically and emotionally drained, her body on the verge of collapse. It was unlikely that she could push away the large, solid man carrying her in such a weakened state. "You look weak. We will go to Dr. Kramer's office," Bastian said calmly, his voice penetrating Odette's fading consciousness. "But that doctor only treats special patients." Odette's objection was cut off by Bastian without hesitation. "You're Bastian Clauswitz's fiancée," he said firmly, resuming his steps towards the hospital. Odette's eyes fluttered closed, the warmth of Bastian's body and the clean scent of sunlight surrounding her. The marriage contract became binding right away. There didn't seem to be any turning back. Bastian. Chapter 30, the most exquisite and gorgeous. "I must admit that the haste with which I prepared for the wedding is unmatched in all my years on earth." Countess Trier expressed her amusement with a laugh and a shake of her head. Her day began with a visit to the jeweler, in search of the perfect gift, and continued with a stop to inspect the finished wedding dress. Next on her agenda was a meeting with Mrs. Gross, the chief planner for the groom's side, to finalize some of the wedding details scheduled for the upcoming weekend. For the past month, every day had been a battle, filled with similarly grueling tasks. Amidst the clatter of carriage wheels and horseshoes, a smile lit up the Countess's face as she heard the words, "Thank you, Countess." As Countess Trier gazed at the seat across from her, she was struck with wonder. There sat Odette, dressed in a lavender muslin gown, her smile as radiant as a sun-kissed summer day. The dazzling jewels adorning her person, bedecked with diamonds and pearls, lent an aura of sophistication to her already stunning appearance. In a mere month, Odette had undergone a remarkable transformation, blossoming into a completely different person. "It is I who should be grateful, for I am relishing the joy of spending money as if it were water." Countess Trier waved away any thanks from her companion. With eyes filled with admiration, she surveyed the work of art created by the combined efforts of Bastian Clauswitz's wealth and her own vision. In a stunning display of chivalry, he made a personal visit to the Countess's opulent abode to deliver the news of his proposal, an evening that followed his visit to Duke Diessen at the hospital. The suddenness of his decision was unexpected, but it was the announcement of the wedding date, which he had boldly finalized and relayed to her, that left her utterly astonished. Despite the barrage of shocks, it was a testament to her fortitude and divine grace that her heart did not falter, leaving her to bask in the glory of her own beauty and elegance. Bastian had but one request for her: make her the most exquisite and gorgeous. Without hesitation, he assured her that the cost was of no concern, and true to his word, provided an endless stream of cash, as if from a fountain of never-ending wealth. "When I first laid eyes on you, I had a sense deep within that perhaps I could make this marriage a reality. And now, look at us." Countess Trier's smile beamed with radiance as she wrapped her hand around Odette's, adorned with an engagement ring so stunning that even her slender finger appeared almost too delicate to support it. The extravagance of the gift was almost too much to comprehend for an engagement that had barely lasted a month, but there was simply no reason to deny her this symbol of love and commitment. "It appears that your fiancé's wealth far surpasses what the world had imagined," the Countess remarked, unable to contain her surprise. The Emperor's desire to protect his daughter has inadvertently extended to protecting his niece as well. As the Countess released Odette's hand, she deftly unfolded her fan with a flourish, casting a mystifying aura about her. Odette continued to smile enigmatically, exuding a quiet and graceful demeanor that left the Countess in awe. It was clear that Bastian's choice in proposing to Odette was unparalleled and simply extraordinary, as the Countess was once again convinced of his impeccable taste. The air was electrified with anticipation as the proposal reached its climactic moment, and when he finally popped the question, it was nothing short of perfect. 7 years had passed since the great antiquarian's departure from the world. In that time, his legacy had been silently fading away, until it was just a distant memory. The rumors and speculations had died down, and the heir, the grandson, remained quiet. The hidden financier, who once dominated the era, had been relegated to obscurity. But while the world had forgotten about him, Bastian Clauswitz had been quietly making a name for himself. He graduated from the military academy as planned, and had been commissioned as an officer. He was living his life with discipline and dedication, just like a true soldier. Bastian had kept his wealth a closely guarded secret, giving only vague hints about his financial status. However, as soon as the decision to marry was made, he sprang into action. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment, biding his time until he could reveal the true extent of his riches. And in choosing Odette as his bride, he had made a shrewd move, selecting the perfect trophy to showcase his new and impressive leap into the upper echelons of society. Have you seen the wedding hall yet? No? Well, tomorrow we have a little time to spare. How about we go together? Countess Trier spoke with a hint of excitement in her voice. Her mind was already racing with anticipation for the chaos that would ensue when they revealed the grandeur of the wedding venue. She couldn't resist the temptation to witness the expressions on everyone's faces as they marveled at the magnificence of the place. Thank you, but I believe I'll have the chance to see it soon enough. You've been working hard, Countess Trier, so please take the time to rest tomorrow. Odette's composure was unwavering as she declined the offer with a polite smile. It was as if she already knew every detail of the wedding hall and the upcoming wedding. Countess Trier couldn't help but wonder why Odette was so serene and composed throughout the entire wedding preparation. It was as if she had already lived 100 years and had seen everything life had to offer. Despite her age, she carried herself with the grace and poise of an old soul. The Countess knew that Odette was not like any other bride she had seen before, but she chose to keep quiet about it. It was clear that Odette was dealing with a lot, especially with her father's recent accident. Even though he was far from perfect, he was still her father, and the news had undoubtedly taken a toll on her. Bastian Clauswitz resolved the Diessen family crisis with a swift stroke of his wealth. He spared no expense in ensuring the Duke's recovery, securing him in a top-tier convalescent hospital near Rats. It was a luxurious confinement, a gilded cage where the Duke was destined to spend his remaining days. As for Tira, the Duke's illegitimate daughter, Bastian arranged for her to attend an elite girls' school in Karlsbar. With the wedding behind them, Tira would be swiftly sent away, effectively banishing the entire Diessen clan from Odette's life. A wave of regret swept over Odette as she said goodbye to her sister, but the Countess saw things differently. She viewed this as a chance for Odette to release the weights that were no longer useful to her and set off on a journey of self-exploration. The Countess admired Bastian Clauswitz's audacity in acting without regard to reputation or appearance. Closer inspection revealed that his strategy was shrewd and uncomplicated, conveying a feeling of direction and clarity. Saving the good gift until the last minute is actually a good idea, Countess Trier remarked. As they traveled, the carriage came to a halt upon a signal. To their surprise, the staff of Sabine Dress Shop had gathered on the main street to greet them. Odette quickly descended from the carriage after rearranging her clothing. The priceless gem, the grandson of the antique trader discovered, was incredibly elegant and lovely today. Middle. For a long time, Sandrine couldn't speak, her amazement leaving her gasping for air. During a little awkward pause, Lucas said, "I'll be taking a walk in the garden for a time, to break the ice." Lucas rose from his seat, a perplexed expression etched on his face, as he darted his gaze back and forth between the two individuals before him. Sandrine remained fixated solely on Bastian, leaving Lucas feeling like a mere prop brought along to lend legitimacy to his visit to the man's home on the eve of the wedding. Aware of his lack of qualification to intervene, Lucas simply stood by, a silent observer to their conversation. Sandrine's rage had subsided, and a hint of a smile crept onto her lips as she spoke. I suppose there is one thing I like about you, she said, her voice carrying a note of amusement. Bastian's attention shifted from the servants hustling about with his bags and settled on Sandrine, curious about what she might say next. Bastian Clauswitz had arrived in person to break the news of his impending marriage. Despite the gravity of the situation, his demeanor was strikingly nonchalant. He explained that he had been offered an advantageous deal by the emperor, one that required him to enter into a sham marriage for a period of 2 years. The most ludicrous part of it all was that Sandrine's father had given his blessing to the arrangement, even after Bastian made it clear that divorce was on the horizon. The allure of benefits and titles was apparently too great to ignore, and Bastian appeared unfazed by the whole affair. With a few deft movements of the abacus, Duke Olivier arrived at a straightforward conclusion: Bastian and Sandrine would remarry regardless, so there was no need to let this interfere with their existing business arrangement. Sandrine was not blind to her father's calculation, but she found it hard to forgive Bastian for his betrayal without first consulting her. She believed that an apology, at the very least, was in order, and so she bided her time. But Bastian, like a fool, failed to offer an apology, and now his wedding day was rapidly approaching. The fact of the matter is, you haven't offered me a single apology, Sandrine said pointedly, her voice laced with frustration. Bastian parroted his response yet again. I've already sought your father's understanding in this matter, and the Duke has granted it, he stated plainly. Sandrine couldn't help but laugh at the sheer audacity of his words. As she chuckled, a plaid pattern formed on her face, cast by the midday sun shining through the window after hiding behind the clouds for a time. For a moment, I forgot that you were just like my father, Sandrine exclaimed bitterly. He only cares about money in his mines, not about me. Even with the mine aside, Countess, the diamond mine belonging to the Olivier family is one of the biggest in the world, Bastian remarked. You should be proud of that, at least. Bastian made jokes while maintaining a serious expression. No, she wasn't even certain it was a joke. You and my father truly are remarkable, Sandrine said scathingly, her words dripped with disdain as she spoke. Living your lives by numbers, never knowing the pain of someone with a heart. Is there anything else you wish to say? Bastian asked sarcastically. Bastian rang the call bell while setting down the teacup he was holding. After giving the butler a few instructions, Bastian quickly turned to approach Sandrine again while still smiling smoothly. I see you're quite occupied with preparations for your move, Sandrine remarked wryly. How does it feel to begin your newlywed life with your stunning wife in your newly built mansion? With a determined look in her eyes, Sandrine held Bastian's gaze and smiled, refusing to back down. Despite the anger coursing through her body, causing her hands to feel cold and stiff with tension, she managed to maintain enough self-control to hold on to the last shred of her self-respect. I can't say much about newlywed life yet, since I haven't experienced it myself, Bastian replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. Perhaps as Countess Lennart, you know it better, since you already had your fair share of it. Wouldn't you agree? Are you trying to insult me? Sandrine retorted, her voice edged with a mix of anger and hurt. I'm just being honest here, Bastian said, his tone unapologetic. Although it does seem a bit absurd for both a married woman and a man who's never been married to be interfering in my affairs, doesn't it? After all, we both have our own experiences with marriage and divorce. His words landed with a smugness that finally pushed Sandrine over the edge. You're putting me in an impossible situation, Bastian Clauswitz. Have you even considered who is at a disadvantage here? Or are you incapable of thinking beyond yourself? Sandrine's voice rose in frustration, her eyes flashing with anger as she confronted Bastian. Bastian's lips curled into a sardonic smile. You're the daughter of Duke Olivier, one of the most coveted brides in the realm. And yet, here we are, having this pitiful conversation. What does that say about you? I beg your pardon? Sandrine said in a confused tone. Bastian's smile faded as he spoke with an air of calculated precision. Your father's position and influence were crucial to me, just as my wealth was to him. Our symbiotic relationship has served us well thus far. However, if we were to enter into a marriage, we could solidify this alliance and ensure its stability for years to come. And in you, I see the woman who can offer me the most in this regard. But let me be clear, I do not consider myself at a disadvantage in any way. Bastian leaned in and spoke with a hint of conviction in his voice. My dear, I have a proposition for you. Once I have completed my dealings with the Emperor, I plan on marrying you. Your privilege is of utmost importance to me, but if for some reason you are not comfortable with it, I am willing to reevaluate things in the next 2 years. Sandrine hesitated for a moment before addressing Bastian. Bastian, her voice filled with uncertainty. Our relationship is what it is, Countess. If you find it difficult to accept, then perhaps it would be best for you to seek another partner for remarriage. Bastian's tone was firm as he spoke to her. His countenance transformed, as if he had donned a mask that he had long since removed. He rose from his seat and addressed the other person. Perhaps it would be wise to continue this conversation once you have had time to fully consider your thoughts and are in a more rational state. Sandrine met Bastian's gaze with a challenging expression. And if I have no intention of complying, are you planning to throw me out? Please understand, my intentions are not to disrespect you, my dearest bride-to-be. I simply believe that it would not be fitting for you to be left guarding an empty home. Bastian spoke softly, an apologetic tone in his voice. He gestured to a clock on the fireplace in the parlor, signaling their imminent departure. Sandrine, unable to endure the tension any longer, stood up. Thank you for your gracious hospitality. In return for your kindness, I promise to be the most enthusiastic guest at your wedding tomorrow. Applauding louder than anyone else in your new home, Sandrine declared with a smile. Bastian expressed his gratitude for Sandrine's kindness, but also politely explained the situation. As much as I appreciate your offer, it will be a small, intimate wedding at our modest home, and unfortunately, we won't be able to accommodate uninvited guests. As Sandrine watched the back of her beloved departing to marry another woman, her heart felt as though it was being ripped from her chest. The crushing weight of the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks, and she burst into tears, her emotions too powerful to suppress any longer. Bastian's footsteps continued to echo in the distance as he walked away, his gaze fixed firmly ahead. Despite the knowledge that he was breaking Sandrine's heart, he did not turn back until the very end, his resolve unshakable. It was a moment of heart-wrenching pain for Sandrine, who could do nothing but watch helplessly as her love slipped away from her.